The committee resumes. The committee resumes with DISA Outcome 1 Program 1.2, which includes Australia's chief scientist. And we'd like to congratulate you, Professor, on your appointment. We look forward to your appearances at the committee going forward. We thank you for the work that you've done and that you will do in the role. And if there's no remarks here, Ms Quinn will proceed straight to questions for Outcome 1 Program 1.2, and I'll go to Senator Chandler.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks everyone for coming along this evening. My first questions tonight will go to Squantum, which I don't think will be of surprise to anyone. Is it the Australian Government's position that its contract with Squantum will result in Australia building the world's first quantum computer in Brisbane?
So that is the intent. So Squantum has been supported by funding from the Australian Government to progress their development of a quantum computer. They have set out their intentions and we look forward to supporting them.
Mm-hmm. What date does the government expect that computer will be operational?
So this is a matter for Squantum as a company with multiple investments and technological milestones to progress. They have indicated in their publications that they expect the facility that they're building in Queensland to be up and running towards the end of 2027.
End of 2027. You say that's a matter for Squantum. It's the Australian Government's funding, though.
It's partly funded, but it's funded by a whole series of other funders as well. So Australian Government is part of the funding, the Commonwealth Government, Queensland Government, but then other private entities. Mm-hmm. So they are a company that they work through their technical milestones. Quantum technology is a new field, so nobody can be absolutely definitive about when things will come available because there's a sequence of steps that they need to work through. So they've given their intention and exactly when it happens will depend on them meeting their technological milestones.
And sorry, refresh my memory, what is the total dollar figure of federal government funding that is being expended on an intention to build a quantum computer?
So I can... Do you want to go?
Senator Helen Wilson, Deputy Secretary, Science and Technology Group. The Australian Government has invested $463.3 million.
Mm-hmm. 463. And I'm correct in saying it's about the same in terms of contribution from the Queensland State Government as well, which is how we get to the close to $1 billion. Okay. What is the current status of the project?
So the status of the project is that they're working through the steps they need to be able to...
Sorry, when you, Ms Quinn, when you say they, do you mean Squantum?
Yes. Sorry. So that the company is working through its investment plans and its technological milestones and all the steps that they need to do along their journey to building the first to putting together their technology. They have opened head office in Brisbane. They've made agreements with the state, with Queensland universities in terms of technological sharing and capability, and they have opened a testing facility at Griffith University to start testing the components of the computer. They're all steps along the way, and they're in the process of working through all the approval processes for the facility.
We'll get to those approval processes, but you say working through technological milestones. Have they met any of those milestones yet?
So they have met the technological milestones. They through their lifespan as a company, they've had series of technical milestones, and it's my understanding they've met all of those technical milestones through their processes.
So, sorry, are they milestones that the department has required Squantum to reach as part of your agreement with them?
So some of those were prior to the Commonwealth's investment in the arrangement. So through due diligence, we were able to ascertain what their milestones were and whether they'd met them and things like that through the due diligence process. In terms of the subsequent steps, I'd have to just check where we're up to on the technical milestones.
Yep, they are keeping us up to date, as you would expect, with all their latest developments. I would also note the US DARPA has recently, again, made an announcement about its assessment of Squantum and where the US DARPA feels that Squantum is up to. I would draw your attention, Senator, to an announcement that Squantum has actually made today. There was an article in the journal Nature.
I'm aware.
So we're in regular contact with the company, and we work with our colleagues in the United States through DARPA as they also undertake assessments of where Squantum are up to on their technical milestones.
So just to be very clear, have any milestones been achieved since the funding was announced on the 30th of April last year?
In terms of technical milestones, I'll take that on notice. Some of that will be commercial in confidence, so I'll take that on notice.
Okay. Where are we at with the planning approvals process for the project? I had a conversation with infrastructure one day this week. I couldn't tell you exactly when, given it's Thursday night. Because obviously they will need to receive a planning approval from Brisbane Airport, given that's where we're building this computer. And they said that they hadn't received anything from Brisbane Airport yet. So what is your department's understanding of where the planning application process is at?
Senator, you're absolutely correct. It's the Department of Infrastructure that administers that legislation and that process. We certainly have been in what I would say are preliminary conversations with both Squantum and the Infrastructure Department as they go through that process. So we talk to Squantum, we talk to our infrastructure colleagues to make sure Squantum are aware of exactly how the process works, and there's been preliminary conversations that we've had.
And you don't have any conversations with the airport itself because it's technically infrastructure's
the Department
part
of
to manage
Infrastructure
that.
administers it. You're absolutely correct.
And we do understand there's been exchange of information. That the Act that the Department of Infrastructure goes under has a sequence and series of titles. So, for example, the word draft means something specific in the legislation, but there has been an exchange of information to facilitate the subsequent processes, like they do with other entities.
So my understanding is that we're not even at the formal draft application stage with infrastructure at the moment.
So we're not at the formal draft as it is in the legislation, but there has been exchange of information.
And so it's the department's understanding that it will be Squantum submitting a planning application as well, or purely
it's Brisbane Airport who deal with the Department of Infrastructure process. So Squantum works with the Brisbane Airport. The Brisbane Airport work with the because they're the ones that are regulated.
Has there been any request at this point in time from your department to expedite any element of that planning application process?
So we've provided information about how the process works, but they're under the Act, it's entirely the Department of Infrastructure's regulatory duties.
So there's been no direction from the minister or anything like that to.
So we have no regulatory oversight of the process, so it's not something that would ever come up.
When are you expecting the sod turn to occur on the Squantum project?
Squantum have said on their website that they're expecting to break ground in 2025.
2025. That's this year. It's my understanding that the planning application process that infrastructure administers takes, at least sort of in the 6 to 9 month, but more realistically the 12+ month period. Do you think they're on track to turn sod in 2025 if we haven't even got the application process formally underway yet?
It's a matter for the Department of Infrastructure and Brisbane Airport. They have a sequence of processes that can be done consecutively. They don't always have to stack up. It depends on the nature. So I don't have a professional view on the veracity or the timing. The Squantum is investing a great deal of effort in it. They've got people working on it, doing the process and doing everything we can see that they need to do. But they are in a regulatory process, and it'll go through in the usual course of events.
And it's one of the reasons, if I might add, Secretary Senator, that Squantum has been in these preliminarily early conversations with the department so that they can be in a position to not only meet the statutory timeframes but really make sure that they're providing the right information that's required.
Has Squantum conveyed to you any expectation of when the planning application will be submitted?
I'll take that on notice, Senator, just because, again, it is the Department of Infrastructure's process. They certainly haven't indicated to me, but I will take that on notice and just check with some of the staff.
I might rephrase the question just to see if I get a slightly different answer, because I am interested in this. Does the department have an understanding of when the planning application will be submitted?
We have yes, we would have what I would call a good understanding of how this should play out over the next week, 2 weeks, months, but I don't have an exact date. No, I will take it on notice.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, I am a little concerned. I know that Squantum have said in media reports that they think the first construction work will take place before July this year, which seems consistent with that 2025 milestone that you referenced. How is that going to be possible if Infrastructure's aviation group hasn't received the application yet?
As I understand it, each submission is unique. They have a series of steps they go through. I don't believe they've given a specific time frame. So Brisbane Airport, I believe, is very experienced at dealing with the process. I imagine they know exactly what they need to submit. Squantum is working closely with them, and they'll go through the process.
What exactly is happening at the site in Brisbane Airport at this point in time? Apart from planes taking off, I accept that, sorry, in relation to the quantum computer.
I thought there'd be in relation to it. I'm not that close to the on-the-ground components, and so we may or may not know either. I mean, what we at this point, what we're doing is making sure that people understand the processes, that we don't have a regulatory role in this process, and so we're not the lead on anything to do with that. And so we are engaging with the company for other elements of our relationship with them. But on this, the relationship is Squantum to the Brisbane Airport Corporation and them into the regulatory process. And so we may or may not know all the intricate details about what they're doing, because it's not something that we're required to know, and it might be inappropriate for us to know elements that are not related to our functions.
But do you have any concerns that there's a chance that the approval won't be granted for possibly 9 months? That doesn't stack up with getting sod turned in 2025.
So the project has a whole series of processes. They're working through them. It's the intent. They are moving on other aspects of the arrangements, including the technological MOUs, working with the ecosystem of quantum scientists to be able to build that capability. So they are operating on several different fronts, all of which need to come together to be able to set up the facility and operate the technological achievements that they're talking about. So we are monitoring what they're doing. The sequence and timing is important, as in any project, but at this stage they're working through the processes.
It's a lot of stars that are going to have to align, though, to start building this thing or start sod turning on this by mid-2025.
I am not an expert in planning processes. I don't have a personal opinion.
Okay. I'm sure you're aware of some of Squantum's other work worldwide in this space. You wouldn't have given them the contract otherwise. Are you aware of the quantum computer that they're building in Chicago?
Yes, we are aware of the arrangements.
Has your department received a briefing from Squantum regarding that project?
Yes, we have had discussions with them about what their intentions are and the support they're receiving from not just from the United States, but we do receive information as an investor on their plans.
Mm-hmm. When did you first receive a briefing from Squantum on the Chicago project?
We might have to take that on notice and go back, because it was at the time that they had struck the deal with the Chicago. There was several entities, so we would have received the information at that time.
Mm-hmm. Minister, has the minister you are representing received a briefing from Squantum regarding the Chicago project?
Having heard what the department said, I'll just take that question on notice as well.
Thank you, Minister. Has Squantum briefed the department on the status of that Chicago project, or the milestones that project is progressing through?
Senator, yes. I meet regularly, it's approximately once a month, with very senior Squantum staff in the United States. I recall that we last had a conversation about Chicago probably 6 weeks, 2 months ago, but I'll take it on notice and get the exact date. In those monthly catch-ups that I have, we cover a range of topics, and Chicago has come up.
Mm-hmm. Has Squantum briefed you on what approvals have been granted for the Chicago project? What are the timeframes for commencement, completion of the Chicago project?
Not in detail, no.
Now, it's been publicly reported that planning approval was given for the Chicago project by the Chicago Planning Commission on the 22nd of November last year, and by the relevant City Council for the Quantum Park on the 13th of December last year. Are you aware of those approvals?
Yes, I've seen the media reporting.
I was about to say, were you aware of them because of the media reporting, or were you aware of them because Squantum told you about them? But I think you've answered that. When do you understand Squantum will begin building their computer in Chicago?
I will take that on notice. And again, when you say building a computer, apologies, it gets a little technical. Squantum have been clear they will build the world's first fault-tolerant quantum computer in Brisbane by the end of 2027. But there are various other ways they can do testing and what they call beta. So I'm going to take that on notice because I haven't met with them in the last month, so I haven't got the most up-to-date information.
So what's the department's understanding of what Squantum is building in Chicago?
I will take that on notice because, again, as I said, things have moved since I probably last met with them. But they are certainly building the world's first fault-tolerant quantum computer in Brisbane by the end of 2027. I will ask staff to get me the more technical information that we last received from Squantum in relation to the computer that they will build in Chicago.
But can you confirm that they are building a quantum computer in Chicago?
I will take that on notice because it does get quite technical quite quickly. So if you give me some time, I'll get the staff to just step out exactly what the difference is. But it is to do with size, scale, compute, and the way they characterise it. I do not want to mischaracterise what Squantum are doing in Chicago.
Okay. If they're not building a computer, what are they building?
We've taken the question on notice, and we're happy to provide what we can within the constraints of commercial confidentiality.
Thank you. I was about to go there.
Is there a chance that we could get a bit of clarity on that question tonight?
We will do our best.
Okay. If that's the case, I might move forward to a slightly different topic, and we'll come back to this Chicago question later. My understanding is that you've launched a review into your probity activity in relation to this contract. Is that correct?
No. We've if this is in relation to the What's on Oz tender, what we're doing is a lessons learnt exercise, as we do for all major projects that we undertake on the project, which is focused on what we have done and the processes within the department, so that we learn lessons for other projects that we might undertake in the future. So we do this for all kind of projects that we do, and so it's not specifically looking at probity, it's looking at our arrangements through the course of the due diligence and finalisation of the decisions of government.
So, sorry, is that review only looking at the due diligence and the finalisation of the contract, or is it looking further back than that to the procurement of it?
To the procurement of
the vendor?
Secretary, if I might, and Senator, because I'm responsible for the internal review, I would characterise it more as a department, we're trying to just capture what I would call best practice and lessons learned from how we undertook the project. We're not reviewing any contracts or procurement per se. We're looking at how did we as a department, certainly looking at our obligations under the Public Government's Performance and Accountability Act, provide the best advice to government. So how internally did we as a department get the right staff, undertake the due diligence? It is an internal way for us to learn lessons and capture some of that best practice.
When was it decided that you would undertake this review?
So we have a standard practice if we're doing a major project that we'll have an evaluation and review at the end of it. It's part of the project cycle. So at the very start, the intention was always to do an internal review, as we do on every other major project.
Okay, let me ask that a different way. When did you start doing this review?
I can confirm that we contracted McGrath Nicol to do the work in October 2024.
October 2024.
But we would have made a decision to do that right back at the very start of the project. But not that particular procurement. We would have waited till the project was at a sufficient stage to be able to review and assess.
Yes, so what was the sufficient stage? What was that? How did you know that you were at the sufficient stage where you could initiate the review?
So in this case...
What's the trigger?
Beg your pardon, Secretary. It was following the government's final decision.
To award the contract to Squantum?
To invest in
Squantum, yeah.
Sorry. That was the 30th of April last year, though, am I right? October 2024 was 6 or so months after that.
So there's various steps that we go through. We were originally going to do this work through our internal auditors as part of our audit program, because it's part of our regular work. But there was a conflict issue, so we needed to go out for other people to be able to do the work.
What was the conflict issue?
I can take it on notice, but it was our internal auditors were doing work associated with the Squantum company, and so we didn't want...
Sorry, as in your internal auditor is contracted to work for the Squantum company, or your internal auditor was looking at another project somewhere in government that...
No, the internal auditor had commercial links with Squantum elsewhere in their entity.
Yes.
And so we didn't use them, so we went out to an external provider. Otherwise, we would have used our internal auditing processes.
Who's your internal auditor?
McGrath Nicol.
No.
Sorry, beg your pardon.
I was going to say that the conflict was not well managed, if that's the case.
That's no.
I don't want to misspeak, so I'll just check.
Could you also, while you're checking that, Ms Quinn, check when your internal auditor was last appointed?
I can ask for that to see whether someone can provide that information, yeah. Do you want me to come? I'll ask and come back.
I'll keep going then. So you had to go out to market for the review because your internal auditor couldn't do it. How long did it take you to go to market?
I'm not sure.
No, I'll take that on notice.
It just seems interesting to me that the decision to invest was made at the end of April 2024, but
There were still sequences and steps in terms of finalising. I mean, things don't kind of stop on a dime. So, and we're in an ongoing relationship. So, this was scheduled in with other work, etc. So there's no mystery from my perspective on the sequence and the timing. Would we have liked it a bit earlier? Yes, because we would have started it a bit earlier if we hadn't have had to go out to market.
Okay. When do you expect McGrath Nichols will complete this review?
I will take that on notice. I'm sorry, I don't have a copy of the procurement in front of me, but it shouldn't take too long. And again, I would note that as Ms Quinn, the Secretary, has indicated, we've continued to be capturing some of the lessons learned and best practice the whole way through. So we're feeding that already into McGrath Nichols' process.
I know that you obviously haven't dealt with an investment similar to this before, but usually speaking, for a project of this size and complexity, how long would you expect that a lessons learned review to take?
Not having done a lessons learned of a project like this, I'm reluctant to provide an opinion. But as I said, I'm confident that the whole way through, have we been capturing best practice? Have we had internal conversations about the lessons that we've learnt along the way? Mm-hmm. So I don't expect it to take months and months and months, but I'll take it on notice.
Again, on notice as well, if we would be able to have the terms of reference for the review, that would be useful. And I would also be interested to know, and again, if you could provide this information tonight, that would be ideal, what the fees are to McGrath Nichols to undertake this review.
I can give you the contract value now. Senator,
oh, wonderful.
Helps.
Let's do that.
It's 109,890.
109?
890, so 109,890.
So we have two providers in terms of our internal audit. KPMG is one, and they renewed their contract in 2023. Mm-hmm. And we're just getting the second one. So we have different auditors for different purposes. So I'm just waiting for the second one to come.
Okay. We might come back to that as well. I'm interested to know if you have two internal auditors, why the other one, the one that wasn't conflicted with Squantum, couldn't do this project.
It could well have been just to do with workload, but...
Sure. Moving on to another element of the project, non-disclosure agreements. There have been a few of those signed in relation to this project and the procurement process that you went through and the EOI process that you went through. Is that correct?
So the expression of interest process did have non-disclosure agreements, yes. Mm-hmm. That's fairly standard practice.
Mm-hmm. It's my understanding that Squantum signed an NDA as well. Is that correct?
They did, yes.
Yes. Did they sign that NDA at the same time that the EOI applicants signed one, or did they sign it earlier?
I think they might have done it earlier.
They did it earlier. I will get you the date, Senator.
Thank you.
We have two auditors because we have a panel arrangement to ensure we don't have capture.
Okay. If you've got a panel arrangement of internal auditors, I'm sure it would have been relatively easy to figure out the conflict issue with one and go with the other, though. Isn't that one of the points of having the panels?
So we went through the process of finding the best way to get this service. So we can take on notice the ins and outs of all the processes, but there was a discussion with our internal audit process, our auditors, an assessment about the best way forward, and then there was approach to market, and then we received it. We're very conscious about ensuring that we followed, actual and perceived conflicts as we do in all the things we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Back to the EOI process then. So Squantum signed an NDA early. Do you have a date for that?
I'm getting it for you, Senator.
Oh, thank you, Ms Wilson. And then the EOIs, the EOI applicants had to sign NDAs in relation to that process as well. And do you have a date for that?
I will get that to you, Senator.
Would it be fair to say that Squantum signed, I think we've discussed this, but Squantum signed their NDA before the EOI applicants signed theirs.
Yes.
Is it the same NDA?
I don't think so, because there were different attributes. The people who were providing the information through the expressions of interest had one only related to the expression of interest. The one that we had with Squantum that we also signed as a Commonwealth would have been potentially broader.
What was that? Sorry, Ms.
It would have been broader, covering
Why is
other
that the
aspects.
case?
Because the expression of interest was asking a set of questions, and the due diligence process that we undertook over time with Squantum was answering those questions and other questions.
What?
It was a sequence and series of discussions.
So, sorry, you've got, let's say there's 10 questions that you want Squantum to answer, and of those 10, you've said 5 you want the EOI applicants to answer. I'm using those numbers for ease of expression. Why bother going out to the EOI process for those 5 questions if Squantum's apparently looking at them anyway?
So what the EOI process was designed to do was to test the market for the capability to be able to produce the capability that the government was interested in investing in. So that process was designed through whole of government processes, building on the standard process for expression of interest. And so we went through that process. It was designed in concert with the technical advisory panel, the interdepartmental committee, including our Department of Finance colleagues who look after these processes in conjunction for other portfolios. So we designed that process with that in mind to test the market, and that's what we did.
Why then was Squantum doing more than what was asked by the EOI applicants before a decision had been taken?
Because in the sequence and steps of the process, Squantum had approached the government back quite a number of, I think, years even before, and so there was a kind of set of information provided. We were in a process. The subsequent kind of breadth of the discussion with Squantum was broader than the expression of interest process because it covered all sorts of additional information as you get to the commercial negotiation aspects of any deal. So the expression of interest process covered the expression of interest. If any of those companies had been selected to go forward, they would have had to sign, as you would in any commercial negotiation, an additional NDA to cover the commercial negotiation phase. So there was a sequence of events through this process over many months, and so we did not require the expression of interest companies to have the same breadth of coverage because it would be onerous on them to start with in terms of their processes, and if they'd subsequently been selected to go forward in a subsequent process, then we would renegotiate with them.
So just
purely on a regulatory burden basis.
Just so I'm very clear here, were you undertaking commercial negotiations with Squantum before your EOI process? No,
we were in discussions about their capability, their proposals, and doing due diligence processes. But no decision had been taken. There was a proposal the government was considering. No decisions had been taken. The decision was to go out to the market and test the availability of others, as we would do in any situation like this. So there was as previous estimates have said, there was a proposal brought to the government. The government did many stages of due diligence as part of that, and based on the quantum strategy as well, which the government was reviewing as it was going through. So they were interested in evaluating what capability there was in the Australian and international market to deliver the sorts of investments the government was interested in. So there was all these steps. One of them was to test the market more broadly than what Squantum was offering.
But seemingly you were only testing the market on a small portion of what you'd already been...
No, that's not the correct interpretation of what I said.
Okay.
You asked about the breadth of the EOI of the non-disclosure agreement, and that was targeted at the EOI so that it wasn't onerous on the companies in terms of being able to participate in the expression of interest. So we were we hadn't narrowed the scope or anything. The scope of the EOI was as we've published the EOI publicly. That was the intention of the government wished to see that information, and that's what we sought through the EOI process, and that was evaluated through subsequent due diligence processes from a technical perspective and capability perspective, and then subsequent decisions were taken by government.
Senator Chandler, I'll come back to you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to intervene for a moment and say that we were due to go to the next portfolio, which is resources, about 3 hours ago, and this has been a half hour block of questions that you're engaged in. How much more time do you think you need here?
I definitely need some more time, Chair, but if you want to move, I would...
About 10, 15 minutes?
Oh, a bit more than that, I think,
right,
on
okay.
this topic.
Okay.
But I am trying...
You're conscious of time?
Yeah,
Okay.
Absolutely conscious of time.
Thank you, Senator Chandler.
If I could just to close out the auditor question that you asked. So KPMG do our internal audit and EY do our managed initiated reviews. So we have that's the split of responsibilities.
Okay, thank you for that. I will endeavour to be efficient, Chair, because I recognise that you've got other things to do and I've got other colleagues who would like to ask questions later on in the program. So just on the NDA, the NDA that Squantum signed, was that a standard NDA?
Senator, if I might just jump in and certainly confirm that the NDA that Squantum signed was on the 21st of March,
yes,
2023.
Yes.
And due to some of the commercial in confidence nature of some of the things in the NDA, I will take it on notice, but I wouldn't characterise it necessarily as standard, but I will take it on notice.
Okay. But it is different to the NDA that the EOI applicants...
And that's we've previously provided these sort of these timelines on the notice, but we did a stage 1 due diligence with Squantum joint with the Queensland Government in February to May 2023.
Yep.
And Senator, if I can just confirm too, just so we've got it on the record, though I think we've done this before. In terms of the EOI process, we invited 21 companies to participate on the 11th of August 2023, and the EOI closed on the 11th of September 2023.
Yep. Why would the NDA be commercial in confidence when you weren't undertaking commercial negotiations with Squantum?
I didn't say it was commercial in confidence. I said due to some of the commercial in confidence discussions, I wouldn't characterise it as a standard NDA, but I've taken it on notice to get back to you in terms of the type of NDA they signed.
Okay. I'm just moving through my questions here. Are you able to table a copy of the NDA that Squantum signed?
I'm happy to take it on notice. I think it was requested through the production of order of documents, and so happy to take it on notice and confirm the status of that document.
Did that NDA preclude Squantum from talking to any investors that they might have been in a process of negotiating with the government?
So we're happy to take on notice. We did have arrangements to ensure the confidentiality of our discussions, but that we also had arrangements if they needed to talk to particular investors that we would have visibility and awareness of that and agreement prior to them doing so. So I'm happy to see what we can share with that. I mean, usually there is a safe space to be able to share information between parties, and then there is mutual agreement if other parties are to be informed of various matters. For example, we were asking them what they were doing with other investors and interested, just like we asked other people. So the technical milestones of companies so that you can have a protection of their IP and decision making, and consistent with Corporation Act obligations and the government transparency obligations as well.
Did the department ever have any concerns that Squantum wasn't complying with the NDA?
So I've been asked this question before, and not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. There was a $91.2 million accounting loss reported for the financial year ending 30 June 2024 on the national interest account associated with the Squantum deal, correct?
That's a question for the Export Finance Australia.
And they're probably appearing right now, so hopefully one of my colleagues will hear that question and go and ask them. Okay. In regards to Squantum's tech progression for the quantum computer, when was the last time the government was briefed regarding Squantum's technology progression to build the quantum computer?
So we clearly received information overnight on their latest developments, but as Ms Wilson said, we regularly engage and talk to them at least once a month, and so that's the main avenue through which we get updates.
On notice, would you be able to provide to the committee the dates that you have had briefings with Squantum since the last estimates?
Certainly.
Thank you. What is the status of Squantum's technology progression? Have they made any technological advances since the announcement that they'd be building the quantum computer?
Well, certainly their announcement overnight, Senator, again, as you said, you've seen, and we're happy to go into the detail of the announcement overnight. And again, I would repeat that we are monitoring how DARPA in the United States is continuing to work with Squantum in terms of monitoring their technology milestones. Does
Squantum need to prove and demonstrate technology milestones before building can commence of the quantum computer in terms of its engagement with the department?
So there are milestones that they have to meet across a range of different factors in terms of governance, funding, and technological and approvals, regulatory approvals. So there's a whole sequence of steps that and gates that they need to go through in terms of the release of various elements of the funding. So that's all been negotiated with support for the company and their development milestones, but also protection for Australian taxpayers.
But my understanding from a brief chat with Finance earlier in the week, and I suspect concurrently with EFA at the moment, is that there have been no payments made against the Squantum, if I call them investment vehicles, I hope you know what I'm referring to, but so the two loans and the equity note.
There are three different components, and I do believe that one of them has been made.
The convertible note, Senator, has been made. The others haven't.
Oh, okay. That's news. What milestone was met to convert the note?
The note hasn't been converted. The funding for the convertible note has been provided, but it hasn't converted to equity yet.
Oh, okay. Right. No, that was consistent with my understanding then. Okay. But so there will be a milestone that needs to be met for that equity note to be converted, but that hasn't yet happened.
Correct. That's correct.
Okay. Can you tell the committee what the milestone is to convert the equity note?
I believe that's commercial. It is covered by the commercial confidentiality requirements.
Okay. Just checking to see which ones I've skipped through here. Do you have any expectation of when the loans expect to be drawn down, or when the equity note converts?
So it's got a condition precedent. So it's not on a timing. It's on a certain activity that will be undertaken.
Raising capital.
So there is a funding element to it, but there are others as well.
I'll ask the question, are you able to tell the committee what those elements are?
in the broad sense, I've already mentioned them: governance arrangements, arrangements around national security deed elements, arrangements around regulatory steps, and then funding elements. So, I mean, there are a set of mitigations put into the contracts to ensure protection of risks and mitigation of downsides. So there's a whole sequence of different elements.
Do you have any expectation of when capital raising will occur from Squantum?
They're in the middle of a Series E capital raise, Senator, which is so far proving to be quite successful, is my understanding.
Time frame on that?
It's a commercial decision for the board of Squantum.
Okay. Last estimates we learned that an independent technology assessor will be appointed to assess Squantum's technology development for loans to be drawn down. Is that correct?
We do have various assurance mechanisms in the system to verify the milestones, yes.
Has the independent technology assessor advisor been appointed yet?
We have a range of experts that we draw on, Senator, depending on exactly the technical milestone they may be looking at. So we draw on those experts as we need to. But I'm just checking whether we do have an appointment, whether we've made that exact appointment. But we continue to work with a range of experts as we monitor Squantum's development in their technical
When you say
milestones.
a range of experts, are they experts within the department, APS staff, or are they external to the department?
And I can confirm they have been appointed, and they're a range of people. There's some people within government, but I'll just confirm exactly where the others and who they are.
Yes. And when were they appointed? So you've got a panel of assessors, is what you're basically saying?
We have a range of people that we can draw on from within government and outside as necessary, depending on what we're assessing and what we need to look at.
And so have those...
The term panel has a particular meaning within government procurement sense, so
yes.
we don't have a panel as a procurement panel.
No.
So, yeah.
Sure. Has this group of assessors conducted an assessment yet on the Squantum work?
They've conducted various assessments all the way through the various phases of due diligence that we've conducted. So we've called on them several times through many phases of work.
Due diligence is one thing. Have they made any assessments in relation to technology?
Yes, they have.
When did they make those assessments?
I'll take that on notice. Some of that will be commercial in confidence, but we'll take it on notice.
Would it be fair to say, though, that that technological assessment hasn't resulted in passing a milestone because we still haven't moved any money out in relation to the contract, the investment?
So we have to be careful that there's no insinuation that they have not met any technical milestones. We have no information. That is not our view. So I just want to be very careful about this is a commercial company with commercial considerations, and we need to be very conscious of what we say to protect their reputation as well as our obligations to provide accurate information. They have not failed any steps to date.
Sure, there's a difference between failing a step and not passing a step.
Neither of those is the case.
Right. So they haven't been assessed for progression of any steps.
So they are working through their processes at this stage. I don't believe there are. We've been doing various bits and pieces, etc. But in terms of the steps, I don't believe there are any failure or lack of passing where they're scheduled to come.
When are they scheduled?
That will be commercial in confidence, just as the milestones themselves are. Quite a lot of these milestones are conditions precedented because they're sequenced elements, and so it's not as simple as it's a complicated process. It's a complicated deal. It's got different elements designed specifically because it is a new technology and a new set of sequences. Some of the arrangements are things like legal obligations, membership of boards, hiring of staff. There's the whole sequence of mitigations in the contracts we have with them.
Senator, it is a question for EFA, but in the spirit of providing the information that I have, they have appointed an independent technical advisor. I'm just getting the date of when.
Thank you. Are you allowed, oh, I shouldn't say you allowed, you get to decide that. Could you tell the committee who the advisor is?
That is a matter for EFA, but I'll take that on notice.
Okay, we'll make...
Chair, I'm just going to share the call now.
Oh, sure. Share away, Chair.
I'll go to Senator Ghosh. Senator Ghosh.
Thank you to the officials. My questions relate to the strategic examination of research and development and the discussion paper that's been released on that subject. Are you able to answer those questions?
You can start and we can see how we go.
Wonderful. It's been touched upon a bit today, but I want to talk about economic complexity and diversity in the Australian economy. The discussion paper does touch upon this in a number of different places, but what has been found, or what conclusions can we draw about the current state of the complexity of the Australian economy?
Thank you, Senator. Australia's economic complexity is currently ranked 102 out of 133 nations and has been on a steady decline since measurements began. That's out of the discussion paper.
And are you able to offer us some insight as to why there's that low level of complexity?
There's a range of structural reasons as to why there's been a decline in our overall R&D. Business investment in R&D has been falling over many years. In fact, it's fallen by more than a third since 2009. Australia is excellent at research. We're very good at research, but we do lag behind other OECD countries when it comes to development and translation. And research collaboration across sectors, so between universities and business, is also rather low. So there's some of the structural issues that we're facing at the moment.
But just to note, the discussion paper has been released by the panel to get other people's views on this issue. And so just a general call for submissions if people have views on what's happening. There's the diagnosis element of the review, and then they'll move towards recommendations.
Appreciating that answer, and that this will be part of the process of the submissions and then the final recommendations and report. Are there any initial comparisons that we can draw, for instance, between Australia and the US, the UK or Singapore in relation to that gap between our research output and translating that into industry or into economic complexity or diversity?
The panel is absolutely looking at the approaches of other countries, and for example, they're looking at, as you said, they're looking at the United States, they're looking at South Korea, they're looking at Japan, they're looking at Germany, they're looking at Israel. So yes, absolutely, are they looking at how other countries are approaching R&D investment and how to lift R&D investment.
And I mean, our structure of our economy is different. We have a larger share of agriculture and mining relative to some of these other countries, and so I mean there are underlying kind of opportunities that we have that other countries don't have, which also go to the measure. Some of it's also the measurement of the actual index itself. So the mining industry is incredibly complex, but that's not how it's judged in the complexity index. So a lot of the innovation and the application of high-end technology such as robotics and artificial intelligence and a whole sequence of other scientific things is not captured because mining is judged to be low complexity in the construction of the index. So it's really important that we look deeply at this issue and look at the structure of the Australian economy, our capabilities now, but also our opportunities for the future. And that we think about the mechanisms that work for Australia. We are not South Korea or the United States, so we should be looking for what is going to work in our context. And that's the task of the panel through the discussion paper and the submissions.
The whole aim, Senator, of the examination is to strengthen Australia's overall R&D system and reignite further investment. And the panel's assessing, the benefits to economic growth and productivity from a more purposeful approach to R&D.
one of the concerns in the Australian economy at the moment is a lack of productivity and a lack of productivity improvement, and that's been a long-term issue in our economy.
Yeah, not just the Australian economy. I mean, low productivity has been evidenced in other nations as well, so it's not just Australia. And so there is a global issue of productivity, and then there's a domestic lens on it as well. And so that, but low productivity is a problem for Australia's future prosperity.
And is that linked, in your minds, and to what extent is that linked to that lack of business investment in research and development?
I mean, so the evidence is clear that that the dollar value of investment in R&D that's commercialised boosts national income. All the evidence is that that is something that we should be looking to do. The question is what arrangements and how to do it for Australia's purpose.
Sorry, I was just going to add to the Secretary's comments. You know, the expert panel's been pretty clear. Innovation through adoption is no longer enough. We do need to activate R&D as the engine of the economy, and part of that challenge will be lifting business investment.
Are there any insights at this stage as to why that investment has been so low? I mean, the benefits of R&D investment, certainly over the long term, seem to almost speak for themselves, both at a firm's level and at an economy-wide level. But why in Australia do we have this sense that there hasn't been that investment?
Well, so there were quite a few. There's been a relatively low business investment. Has been not just a recent. Actually, more recently, we've had a great deal of investment. There's been various discussions as we've moved through time. Initially, the concern about non-mining investment was mining investment was booming and non-mining business investment was not. And at that time, there was a great deal of discussion about what was causing that. Some of that was to do with the fact that the competitiveness in our mining industry had resulted in a $1.10 US dollar Australian dollar exchange rate, which was making it difficult for non-mining sectors to prosper. When the mining investment boom, which significantly added to our productivity and added to our national wealth, kind of moved into production phase, we then saw lower investment than expected. There were a bunch of discussions around that. Some of it was to do with the risk culture within business, in terms of the phrase used was sort of scar tissue from the GFC and other factors that Australian investors were more risk averse than other countries. And then subsequently we move into things like COVID and other sort of shocks. So there's been a sequence of shocks and impacts on the Australian economy. The most important thing for thinking about the future is what are the policy settings and the arrangements we need to boost investment and to be able to commercialise the innovation and the research that we are actually world class at. And there's a whole sequence of issues from capable staff, funding, business cultures, taxation systems, other regulatory regimes. So all of those things are to be considered, but part of that's the ecosystem in which research and development and business investment operates. And we do need more R&D in Australia to produce higher productivity going forward.
And Senator, I might just quote the chair for you, the lovely Robin Denholm, who has said Australia's business culture needs to shift to build an environment where taking calculated risks is acceptable. There is an onus on company leaders to create space for scientists, engineers and innovators to experiment, fail and ultimately succeed.
So that's a proposition by the chair of the panel, and they've invited alternative views or corroborating views with evidence so that they can provide advice to the government.
So the terms of the discussion paper and the call for submission seems incredibly broad, and I note your point about commercialisation. Is there a framework by which you're going to look at areas where Australia has a comparative advantage, particularly internationally, or is the expectation that will be driven by the people making the submissions and the commerciality of those relevant areas of investment?
So in my experience of review panels and processes like this, it's a bit of both. That the panel of the review panel have been selected for their expertise in this area and their personal knowledge. They are drawing on a secretariat staff drawn across public public sector and other contributors from academia and elsewhere. They will look at the submissions. They will clearly have to come up with a framework in order to provide advice to government. So it's a bit of both in the process. When we're thinking about Australia's comparative advantage, one of the things that we, like a term I use, is we can create our own comparative advantage. We are a function of our capable people, our natural resources and our regulatory frameworks. And so we have some natural resources which create a comparative advantage, but we still need regulatory frameworks, and they're decisions of governments at all levels.
They're doing a lot of data analysis at the moment, Senator, but they're absolutely out and about doing the public consultation and speaking to a whole cross-section of industries. And as I said, they're holding roundtables. There's been some online events. There's more roundtables and bilaterals scheduled.
But just one note on the data that the panel have put in the public domain. There's always different parts of the system will see themselves in the review, because we've clearly got businesses, academics, and then we've got government. The statistics show that our biggest differential to OECD and other comparative countries is in the business space. And so that's, from the data that's available, is the first one. But the question is, how is that interrelated with other aspects, because they're all connected.
One of my concerns in this space is when we talk about turning our research foundation into more practical or commercial endeavours, is that we don't undermine our commitment to basic research. In relation to this R&D strategic examination and the way we set up the system afterwards, how important is basic research in that context, and how do we ensure that that retains its importance or its support within the system, while also looking to then move into the commercial or more practical aspects of its application?
Senator, part of the terms of reference do direct the panel to examine how we can grow our core science and innovation capability, so it's something they'll be considering.
We should be able to keep our excellence in research as well as move into value-added processes. Other countries have been able to do those two steps, and so I think Australia should be able to as well.
Is the review looking at the R&D tax incentive?
It's part of the whole ecosystem, so it's not necessarily been tasked to look at it in specific intensity, but it is part of the system. And we will be providing information, as will others, in terms of how it operates and what role it currently occupies within the system, and how it's set up and all those sorts of things. So it's certainly part of their remit.
In addition to tax, what are the other sorts of policy incentives that you are, in broad brush terms, expecting or you think would, at this stage, assist in making or encouraging that R&D investment?
So the kind of sequence, the sort of buckets of kind of issues that the discussion paper goes through. One is funding and incentives and arrangements around funding. One is around the risk culture in institutions that undertake commercial decisions and research decisions. Then you go to the commercialisation and business models and how those are developed within Australia compared to others. So, for example, I've kind of mentioned earlier in relation to a question about structure of Australian business, there's a really interesting report by the AASA about the missing middle. Other countries have more mid-sized firms. We have lots of little ones and big ones relative to other comparable economies. So the structure of business is a factor, the structures of our markets, the opportunities we have. I mean, there is a whole sequence of kind of issues. At the end of the day, economic decisions are driven by opportunity and regulations. So what's the incentives people have?
And do you have a sense of the profile in some of those comparative countries, US, UK, South Korea or Singapore, as to where the business R&D investment comes from in those three categories that you were talking about, small, medium and then larger?
So they all, I mean, the regulatory regime and the relationship between business and government and universities and other entities in the ecosystem are different in all the different countries. I mean, there's sort of the characterisation that South Korea has a great deal of government leadership. They have come from a government entity-driven cooperative relationship with firms, so that the government's very heavily involved. The United States is involved, but in a different way. They provide a lot of infrastructure through their national science and technologies, and they have a very strong university sector that attracts the talent of the world. So the United States has got the government still heavily involved, but it does it in a different way. And then you move, Japan's more like Korea in terms of the way the government gets involved in decisions. Germany has a different focus again. They have a lot of middle-sized companies that do a lot of their R&D, and they're supported through the financial systems such as the Landesbanks in Germany, which are publicly supported financial institutions. So they do it through that, but they also have a different arrangement for IP and how they kind of store that. And then you've got other smaller countries that do different things, like the Nordic countries and in Israel. So everyone has a slightly different arrangement because it depends on the role of government, the role of business, the taxation structures, and the actual underlying comparative advantages of the countries. So it's a complex question, and I look forward to the review and all the submissions that people will be making to bring it together so that it's a question that Australia has looked at before. This review is an opportunity over a reasonable amount of time. It's not being rushed. It's being set out in stages to allow for a really good examination of a fundamental question that we need to answer for our productivity future.
Is that a natural place to finish, Senator Ghosh, or do you have another question?
I'm interested in this over number, but that's fine. Thank you, Chair. That's a good place to stop.
Okay. It really does sound like a really interesting review. So,
I've got about 10 more minutes, Chair.
Senator Chandler.
Thank you very much, Chair. So just to recap on where we were at previously, no loans have been drawn down in relation to Squantum and the equity note has not been converted, correct?
So the equity note is structured as a loan instrument to start with.
Yep.
And then it converts to equity.
And that has not happened?
So
It is not converted to equity.
it hasn't converted.
Yes.
They have received the money, so it's operating as a loan at the moment.
Yep.
So they have, in that sense, received funding.
But the other two loans have not been drawn down?
Correct.
Correct. Does the department have any concerns regarding technology risk in relation to Squantum?
None that have been brought to my attention, no.
No.
None that have been brought to your attention. Any within the department?
I doubt so. Otherwise, people would have brought it to our attention.
So, and just quickly back to the Chicago question, and I know we took a few questions on notice there, and I will look at those answers very carefully. Given the fact that we know that Squantum is building another computer in Chicago, has the department sought any assurances from Squantum that the computer that they are building in Brisbane will, in fact, be the world's first quantum computer?
Yes, we have.
You have sought assurances from Squantum?
Yes.
When did you seek those assurances?
In the
that was the decision, the agreement between the government and the company.
Sure, but this Chicago project has cropped up.
And so we have a set of agreements with the company, and they're doing other. They were in the United States and are in the United States. They've also had activity in the UK before, so we're aware of all those activities. So the government's deal with Squantum is as you said, to build the world's first, and we have sought assurances subsequently.
Subsequent to the Chicago build getting approvals at the end of last year?
Yes. We have continued to have regular conversations with them on a whole range of things, including the commitment to build the world's first fault-tolerant quantum computer in Brisbane in 2027.
Okay. I have a couple of questions for the Chief Scientist on this, if he could come up to the table, please, just quickly. Couldn't let you get off scot-free for your first estimates. Hello, Professor. Have you reviewed Squantum's technology?
Not at all.
You haven't?
No.
It's an almost $1 billion investment from Australian taxpayers. Will you be undertaking an assessment of Squantum's technology?
I'm waiting for my security clearance to come through, and then I can look at the science behind the claims of Squantum.
Right. That's a bit inconvenient that you've got to wait for the security clearance. I mean, sorry, I understand why you have to get the security clearance, but it's a bit unfortunate that you're not in that position yet.
There's plenty else to do, Senator.
I don't doubt that, Professor. Do you have a list of priorities of technology that you'll be examining, and is Squantum's on it?
The way the chief scientist works is there's a work plan negotiated with the Minister of the day.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't negotiated that work plan with the current Minister.
Mm-hmm.
He's been very respectful of the fact that there's an election coming up.
Sure.
So the things that I'm working on are extremely important, finishing up some work from NSTC, National Science and Technology Council, and they include our study of misinformation and disinformation,
mm-hmm.
and also infrastructure, or the research toolkit, as NSTC calls it.
Mm-hmm.
So those are my immediate priorities between now and the next government.
Okay. When you get your clearance, will it be a priority for you to review Squantum's technology?
Well, absolutely. I think the Minister described me as a curious person. I'm fascinated both as a scientist and as a taxpayer about that technology.
Have you had it?
Senator,
Sorry.
I've been described as a curious person too. I should...
I've never heard you described that way, Senator Ayres.
I should. I think that's right. That's right. I've really opened the door at this late stage. That is true. I think, as the chief scientist, and welcome Professor Hammett to your first estimates, as indicated, there is a work plan that the chief scientist develops.
And we're not there yet.
With the Minister.
In effect.
That process, I think, is underway. The last chief scientist did have an exhaustive engagement with this particular piece of work. So I won't prejudge that work plan, but you can imagine that there'll be a level of engagement that is not about duplicating work that is already done,
mm-hmm.
but will be appropriate to, as you say, a piece of work like this that is of such national significance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Professor, have you had, recognising that you haven't got security clearance yet, have you had an unclassified briefing on Squantum?
No.
Okay. I'll leave it there, Chair.
Oh, thank you very much, Senator Chandler. I understand that concludes the questions that we have for Outcome 1 Program 1.2. We thank you all for answering our questions. Thank you, Professor Hammett, for your first appearance at Estimates as well. We'll see you again. Program 1.2 goes with our thanks. And we now welcome Outcome 1 Program 1.3, supporting a strong resources sector, and we'll take a brief recess while you come to the table. Outcome 1, Program 1.3, supporting a strong resources sector. If there were no opening remarks of any kind, we'll go straight to questions and we'll go to Senator McDonald.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Chair. And great to see you. Exciting part of the day now that we've got rid of all that other boring stuff. So I'll be putting in a bid that we move further ahead in the schedule going forward. Chair's not picked up on my brilliant idea. Move resources further forward on the agenda.
I'd like to change the output 1.3 and give it a higher number then.
That's exactly right. Yeah, A 1.3. Anyway, I'd like to ask you some questions about the East Coast gas market. It was reported that in peak demand periods of last year, the South West Queensland gas pipeline was operating at 106%. Noting this, would you agree that in the demand period there existed no physical way to get more gas from Queensland down into southern states?
So that technically is a responsibility of the Department of Energy, who look after the domestic onshore energy market. But we read all the reports, ACCC and AEMO and the others, given the shared responsibility. And so there are at times constraints on the movement of gas from Queensland to southern states. And there is a series of storage facilities and other mechanisms to try and smooth out demand through the cycle. And there are people looking at those issues to see whether there are alternatives.
Noting that the ACCC forecasts southern states to have a shortfall of 16 petajoules in 2025, what options are available in the immediate term to fill this gap?
So the mechanism that the Minister for Resources is responsible for is evaluation of whether the Australian domestic gas security mechanism should be triggered or not, and that is a process that we go through every quarter, which allows us to assess what's going to happen in terms of the East Coast gas market and whether there are any supply issues that require that mechanism to be activated. So far, the market has adjusted such that mechanism hasn't been invoked.
Does the government have any plans to support infrastructure upgrades or new supply developments?
So on the kind of infrastructure front, there is a domestic energy market consideration, and I am aware that they are going through a process to look at options in that front. In terms of supply, as I think you know, Minister, domestic onshore supply is a state matter. Offshore supply is a matter that this department supports the Minister in, and so there has been an examination of acreage releases, and some of those have progressed in recent times that will, not for 2025, but going forward, potentially add to supply.
New offshore acreage releases?
There have been, yes. Or not,
no,
I'll get my terminology right, but all the different stages, we are progressing through those in order to make available for companies to invest in new fields.
Terrific. So what stage are new offshore acreage releases at, please?
Do you want to...
Yes, so Robert Jeremenko, Acting Deputy Secretary, Resources Strategy Group. Senator, so I'll get Mr Weeks to come to the table, who has all of the details, but in terms of the last public announcement by the government, it was September 2024 that the Minister announced and we provided some further detail to you from memory after the last estimates about the actual timings of the various stages in those processes for the three releases. But just to support what the Secretary was saying on and to your question about the infrastructure, I mean, there has been reported some positive messaging and announcements from private companies, APA in particular, in recent days in terms of plans to increase that capacity, and that is one of the areas that the ACCC has spoken to as accounting for that possible shortfall in winter, as well as the Secretary mentioned, the storage capacity in Iona. But I'll pass to Mr Weeks.
Cliff Weeks, General Manager, Offshore Resources. Senator, can I just get you to restate the question? There are a couple of different things there.
The Secretary said that there were new offshore acreage releases in the pipeline and that there were different stages. And I just want to ascertain what stage any new offshore acreage releases were at.
The way we look at it, Senator, is there's, as a system, there's different parts that, so you have your acreage release. Prior to that, we receive nominations from industry. Yes. So as part of that nomination process, we collate that information. We then provide it to government, and then government decides if they want to do an acreage release. Mm-hmm. Within the system as well, we also have exploration permits, retention leases, and obviously as they come online, they will move into production. Mm-hmm. So as an ecosystem of all those different types of titles, that's part of the response. Yeah.
Terrific, thank you. What I was specifically getting at was new acreage releases, and from the Secretary's answer, I inferred that there was new acreage releases that would be happening offshore soonish in a time frame, and I wondered if you could speak to that, please.
Well, we had the acreage release last year, Senator, that I can go through the different proponents of that.
In my mind, Senator, I was thinking about the requirement for acreage releases and then subsequent investment to bring supply on. You know, we can go through the numbers about where things are up to. I wasn't thinking about an imminent announcement or anything like that of new ones, but because obviously it takes time once the release has happened in order to get new supply to market.
Okay, so if we go to the two from last year, Vic L35 and Vic 36, announced by Minister King on the 27th of September 2024, when did each of those licences first reach the Minister's desk?
Just give me a second, please.
You're right.
So the information I've got, Senator, so bidding closed on the 3rd of March 2022, resulting in 10 bids over 9 of the areas. 6 offers were made. 2 permits were awarded from the release, T50P offshore Tasmania and Beach Energy, and WA 554 offshore Western Australia to Woodside Energy. 4 offers lapsed and reverted back to vacant acreage. I'll have to look through. I've got my team online, Senator, so I'll try and get that date for you.
Thank you, I appreciate that. What I'm trying to figure out is how quickly these are being turned around. So what date they went to the Minister's office, and then what date did they come back out? What date did you get a decision? Because I recall that they were released on the same date as the ACCC shortfall report. All right, while you're working on that. Mr Jeremenko, what projects currently under development could address those shortfall warnings, please?
Well, Senator, there have been some encouraging announcements by Beach Energy in offshore Victoria. So there have been 2 new gas production licences granted in September 24, which I think was a connection to your last question. And they are specifically going to, once active, boost supply in the East Coast market. Senex Energy is also proposing a $1 billion expansion to the Surat Basin projects, and the plan is that will produce up to 60 petajoules each year, and that's also East Coast, but granted Queensland, but as I say, there are some encouraging signs in terms of investment and pipeline capacity.
There does seem to be a lack of understanding across Australia that the shortfall is in the southern states, in Victoria particularly. Can I assume that the price of gas developed, for example, the beach projects or in or offshore of Victoria, will avoid the transport costs of piping gas from Queensland and will therefore be more affordable?
Well, I mean, the price will, a number of factors will influence that price, but I mean, keeping everything else equal, not having the transport costs for those projects that you would have if you were bringing the gas south would obviously be an input into that price, but there are a whole host of factors, including work that's underway on import terminals and the overall supply of gas in the market as a whole. So
that's a very broad discussion.
Well, yeah.
Specifically, what I was asking was that the development of supply locally will not incur the costs of moving it, whether it be through an LNG import terminal or through a pipeline.
Yes, I was saying yes in a very complex way.
Yeah. Whether that results in a lower price or not is a separate question.
Yes. Are there options in Victoria to develop new supply?
I can answer that, Senator. There's 14 current exploration permits in Victoria, so I can give you the details if you'd like.
I would appreciate that.
So I'll start with the permit numbers. So Vic P43, which is...
Okay, if there's 14, I'm going to ask you that you write this down on a page and provide it rather than me transcribe it. If that's
Absolutely.
Okay. So thinking of those 14 exploration licences, they're all exploration licences, are they?
They are, Senator, and 13 of them are active.
Okay. So given they're still exploring, we don't have any idea of how prospective they are yet?
That's right, Senator, yes.
Okay. Are we relying, they're onshore exploration permits?
Sorry, I don't do onshore.
No, that's my question. These permits, are they onshore or offshore?
Offshore.
They are offshore, excellent. Considering the pipeline constraints in peak demand periods, what gas storage options are there in Victoria and New South Wales?
So gas storage is looked after by DQ. So in terms of that detail, I don't have it in front. I mentioned the Iona storage. There's certainly work underway. Victorian Parliament has passed some legislation recently to look at some possible different storage options for petroleum. So there are a couple that I have to hand, but we could certainly talk to colleagues and get you that detail.
My understanding is that storage was at 13.9 petajoules in November of 2024, and so they need an additional 11 petajoules of additional gas at Iona before May for winter
Correct.
storage.
The ACCC report pointed that out, but certainly with the... and it was also pointed out in that report encouraging signs that that level of storage as at that date was higher than was predicted at some point earlier. So encouraging that there was more in storage to ameliorate any potential winter shortfall in the southern states, but then also, of course, there's the pipeline capacity that will still allow the Queensland gas to be brought south.
All right.
But
so
the ACCC's assessment is that it's tight in 2025. That's their overall assessment.
Yeah. Is the government looking at options to support the development of new or expanded storage options in Victoria, like the depleted Bass Strait basins?
So that is a matter for the energy ministers and the Department of Energy. So we don't look at... I mean,
I assume you're consulted, though, given that you're responsible for production.
So we do work with them, but they are the ones that look at energy storage. We look at what's happening offshore. And as Mr Jeremenko said, the change in the legislation in Victoria was to allow for potentially for more storage through their part of the offshore system. So we certainly worked with them in the development of their legislation to make sure it was consistent with Commonwealth legislation, so that they're working potentially together. But in terms of actual advice on storage options in Victoria or elsewhere, that's a policy matter for the Minister for Energy.
What about depleted offshore basins, Bass Strait basins?
If it's in the offshore component, then that would fall to us, yes. So
what options are there for offshore Bass Strait depleted basins?
So the first element was the Victorian legislation changes that would allow gas to get from onshore through their component into the offshore, and they've passed that legislation. So that then the question then is a commercial matter about who wants to make available or explore those options. So from a regulatory perspective, things are in place. It's up to either commercial concerns or those who look after that policy to look at it.
So from a regulatory position, there aren't barriers that you foresee for you converting a licence from a production licence to a storage licence in a depleted offshore.
So there would have to be a process to go through on that, and we would step through it, but we haven't. I don't think believe we've received any applications of such a nature.
No, there would certainly need to be, to support what the Secretary was saying, we would need to examine whether there would need to be more regulatory framework around the sort of thing that is proposed by, or sort of thing that the Victorian legislation looks like it will now permit. And Senator, you've probably spoken as well. We've spoken to GB Energy, who are interested in being involved in that, and have spoken to Victorian colleagues. But at this stage, there is no engagement with us, nor is there a need for us to move at this stage to enable that to occur. But we're keeping a close eye on that regulatory framework.
All right. So, are you doing any work on what the regulatory changes might be in order to facilitate something in offshore waters?
I would have to check with the team. As I say, they have been in touch with Victorian colleagues, and I imagine some of that discussion would have touched on it, but I wouldn't say there is a large program of work underway, but there may have been some initial discussions.
Thank you. Considering these issues and the forecast that the East Coast considering these issues and that the East Coast is forecast to have between 77 and 112 petajoules of surplus supply this year, despite the 16 petajoule shortfall in the south, surely the urgency is either upgrading the southern gas infrastructure or developing new southern supply. Would that be reasonable?
Well, they are two factors that could go to making sure that we do not reach a position, as is forecast, of a shortfall on the East Coast in 2028. I mean, the other...
Sorry, just to be... The shortfall in Victoria.
Yes, East Coast. East Coast, as the ACCC puts it.
Right, OK. I'm just intrigued because we're talking about a surplus further north and a shortfall in Victoria. And it perturbs me that we have an Australian gas crisis when it's really a Victorian gas crisis that we're trying to solve, getting gas to Victoria. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
I was just going to add that the other policy levers that the government has enacted include the Code of Conduct and the exemptions framework, the ministerial exemptions, that as a result of those exemptions granted to 6 companies, there are some 604 petajoules of extra gas over the next sort of 8 years that are being committed to the system, including in years that, according to the ACCC forecast, we're going to be shorter in terms of the supply. So that is a positive factor as part of the work that we do with DQ, with states, to try and really bring to life the challenges that were outlined in the Future Gas Strategy, which is we will need gas as a transition fuel.
Yeah, I mean, it's positive that you've identified additional gas. We still remain the constraint of actually getting it south, don't we? So I look forward to seeing what APA comes forward with their $70 million upgrade announcement and see how much additional gas that will allow for. The ACCC last night said that we've been recommending for a number of reports that any mandatory moratorium in a number of states be lifted so that there could be proposal consideration to enable new supply in the southern states, which are facing quite significant supply shortfalls. Is the government aware of this advice?
So, I heard the majority of what you just said, Senator, but just the first bit. ACCC said that they have heard, did you say?
Last night they said, we have been recommending for a number of reports that any mandatory moratorium in a number of states be lifted so that there could be a proposal by proposal consideration to enable new supply in the southern states, which are facing quite significant supply shortfalls.
Sorry, thank you for that. Absolutely. I mean, they have been open about that in their public reporting in those interim gas inquiry reports, and the ACCC with DQ, Treasury, ourselves, and other relevant departments will meet regularly to discuss the gas code exemptions. ACCC reports feed into our consideration in advising Minister King on the heads of agreement and the domestic gas security mechanism decisions each quarter. So the ACCC is part of that broader conversation.
And we brief our ministers, both ministers, the Minister for Industry and Science and the Minister for Resources, on the ACCC reports.
So has the government, and I'm talking about this department, had any engagement with the Victorian or the New South Wales governments about this, about lifting moratoriums?
The Minister for Resources has conversations with her counterparts through the Resources Ministers' meetings, and the situation in the gas market has been discussed at that forum. In terms of other discussions that the government might have had bilaterally with ministers, I would have to take that on notice.
Minister, can I ask you what actions is the government taking to address the mandatory moratoriums in the southern states?
Well, certainly, if you look at the future gas strategy, it does, I think, make it pretty clear that the government's view is that there is going to need to be more supply in the system, and of course that extends to both more supply, but also to some of the infrastructure questions as well. We don't do megaphone diplomacy with the states, so I'm not sure what discussions the minister's had directly with her counterparts. She has approved, as you've just been discussing, new exploration permits, including off-store storage capacity. In fact, there's been substantially more CCS
Would you
permits.
mind if I interrupt?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. It is this issue of the state-based moratoriums that I'm trying to get to, because, as we've just discussed, it's getting it to the local pinch points of Victoria and New South Wales. And
I think I've gone on that question. If there's anything more that we'd say, I suppose we'll provide it on notice. But I've tried to be, we are in government, not megaphone diplomacy here in terms of the position of the government. That's open to you to do. And others, who aren't in government. Our position is we want to see more supply. We've, as Mr Jeremenko has outlined, there's a little over 600 petajoules of domestic supply commitments which have been secured now, so there is action on this front. We have, since we've taken government, extended the gas trigger, which the previous government didn't extend. So we are, I won't go through the whole list.
No, thank you. I'm looking for additional information.
We're very focused on this question against the backdrop of 10 years of previous government sitting on its hands.
Of course, predictably. Thank you, Minister.
It was predictable.
Considering that
true.
the southern states will be in a 16 petajoule shortfall this year, surely the most urgent and desperate need is to develop new southern supplies, which is what I'm trying to get at, is not what's happening in the northern states. It is the restrictions, the mandatory restrictions in Victoria in particular, that is offshoring jobs from that state. The ACCC said that they weren't aware of any actions that the federal government had taken to encourage states to lift those mandatory restrictions. The ACCC also flagged their repeated concerns with lengthy approval delays and its impact on the development of new or continued supply. Does this not prove that the government's delay of the North West Shelf extension is contrary to repeated advice from the ACCC?
So, I mean...
I was asking Mr Jeremenko, but Secretary?
The government went through the whole process of the gas strategy to put out for all, including state colleagues. There were discussions around the development of that strategy and the launch of that strategy about the need for more supply in Australia. There are several mechanisms through which the government engages with its states. Minister King has a Resources Ministers meeting and Minister Bowen has the Energy Ministers Forum. Both those forums have discussed, as my understanding, issues related to gas supply as well as other things. We have been working through with the government, and the government has taken action on all the areas it has control of. The matter around environmental approvals is one for our environment colleagues.
So the ACCC has also highlighted that diverting additional LNG from Queensland will not be enough to address the structural shortfalls caused by lack of gas development in the southern states. This being the case, can you point to any new domestic gas projects that have begun operation in the last 3 years in Victoria?
So we've discussed the prospective one from Beach Energy.
Mr Weeks might have some.
Yeah.
Senator, at the last estimates you had some questions around Artisan and Labella fields. So we have some information around their contribution to the East Coast gas market. So gas from both of those fields in the Otway Basin will restore the Otway gas plant to its nameplate capacity of 205 terajoules per day. The supply capacity is equivalent to 15% of Victoria's current total supplies based on AMIO estimates. So the plant is currently operating at 70% of nameplate capacity based on FY25 production of 150 terajoules.
Terrific. When did you say that nameplate capacity would get back to 100%?
So the first gas from Artisan and Labella is expected in mid-2026.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to the Chief Economist, please. Thank you, Mr Wicks. Very helpful as always. My questions, as you unpack, I'd like to ask you about the December 2024 Resources and Energy Quarterly. Ms Dardell, page 50 of the REQ under gas states that global gas demand increased by around, 3% in the first half of 2024. Additionally, figure 6.1 on the same page highlights significantly increasing global LNG demand growth forecasts to 2026. Noting this, can you outline your expectation of the growth and demand for LNG in the next few years, please?
Thank you, Senator. Michelle Dowdall, Chief Economist and Head of Division Analysis and Insights. So as the REC sets out, we do expect demand to grow over the coming years, particularly in the Asian region, as we see industrial activity continue to increase there. And we also see the broader industrial decarbonisation around the world contributing to increased demand for gas as more processors switch from coal to gas.
What opportunities does Australia have to fill this increasing demand?
So we are currently a trusted trading partner with a number of our Asian counterparts, and so there are continued opportunities to have investment from those countries and meet those demands through a range of expansions in production. Sorry.
On page 51, it noted that the global LNG demand will be largely driven by Asian demand. And given our lengthy export relationships with Asia, I would agree that that seems to be an obvious place for us to be growing our LNG exports into. Page 52 also notes the increasing industrial demand for LNG in Japan and Korea, driving increasing LNG demand. What opportunity does this provide for Australian exports?
As I said, we have existing relationships with those countries, so ongoing opportunities to continue to build on that and be their trusted trading partner. I would note that, though, there are a range of fields around the world that are being developed, so it's one that there is increasing competition for Australian gas, but there are still opportunities for Australian producers to supply those markets.
Terrific. Considering this future growth and demand from our trading partners, what engagement did you or your office have in the development of the future gas strategy?
So we had a range of consultations along with our policy colleagues, with both producers, industrial consumers, our international governments, so the Government of Japan and Korea, as well as a number of other commentators and market analysts who have views on the future needs and demands.
The technical economic analysis underpinning the report was coordinated by the Office of the Chief Economist.
So these predictions about future LNG demand were factored into the strategy?
They were.
How does this strategy lay out a plan to meet this future demand then?
So that's back to our policy colleagues. Over to you, Rob.
Well, certainly making sure that, as the strategy does, make it very clear that the foundational contracts that a number of these international customers and countries have engaged in, and as a result of huge, in the case of Japan particularly, huge investments in Australia to enable the infrastructure to find and process the LNG is one of the big parts. I'll also note that our ongoing engagement with international partners, both through our posts in the countries as well as through representatives here in Australia, will continue to inform policies that those countries are looking at. I mention that because, as you may know, Senator, last week Japan, the Cabinet endorsed its 7th energy plan, and that reinforced the fact that the demand from Japan in terms of Australian LNG will remain as high as it has been and remain relatively stable over the next 15-20 years, mainly because of those long-term contracts. But they also pointed out that under a risk scenario, if nuclear and renewables do not take up the slack in their energy system that they plan, it may actually increase by some 10% the amount of gas that they, LNG, that they will need out to 2040. So I think the messaging, the continued engagement with international partners on the government's clear plan to have gas as part of the system out to net zero 2050, which Japan also has, in the case of Japan, but with all partners, certainly helps to encourage that continue.
Thank you, Mr Jeremienko. The committee's due to take a 10-minute scheduled break. We'll do that. We'll return at 8:45. During the break, the committee will meet and see if we can provide any advice to some of those waiting in the rooms behind about whether they're needed or not. But the committee will break and resume at 8:45. The committee resumes with DISA Outcome 1, Program 1.3, and the committee advises that we can release Geoscience Australia.
I had about 400 questions to Jess.
And we can also release the CSIRO. You go with our thanks. Thank you. We resume with 1.3 resources, and I go to Senator Ghosh.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you once again for the witnesses for being here. My questions relate to the production tax credits and our critical minerals policies. Has the department modelled how many jobs can be created in Australia by building our capacity to process and refine critical minerals onshore?
So I don't believe we've got a specific number, but as part of the analysis that we provided to the government as part of the deliberations under the Future Made in Australia, worked jointly with the Department of Treasury and others. We did apply the national interest kind of framework and the economic analysis, and it was clear that there were benefits to Australia to increasing the complexity of our processing for critical minerals, which is what the critical minerals tax incentive is designed to do. It's not that part of the ecosystem is not designed for extraction, but for processing and adding more value added within Australia. There's economic reasons for doing that in terms of the value added capability and the increased profitability from those resources. There are environmental reasons in relation to transport costs and emission reductions. On the other side, there are issues to manage in terms of the processes. And there are national security reasons to consider the development of supply chains because the critical minerals processing system is very concentrated in one country at the moment. So we need to diversify our sources of supply for other countries, not just Australia.
And that one country is China?
China does have the majority of the processing at the moment, yes.
Let me start with the economic reasons, or stay with them perhaps. What is the anticipated or projected impact of production tax credits on Australia's GDP? What's the potential gain?
Samantha Robertson, General Manager, Resource Tax Incentives Branch Senator. My understanding is the modelling is actually in the impact assessment that was undertaken by Treasury, and it's around $70 billion.
Sorry, I missed that number.
$70 billion.
$70 billion, okay.
69.9 is what's in the impact assessment.
May I ask if you've received any feedback from the resources sector on this proposal?
We certainly have. As part of developing the proposal, we had engagements, and as part of the process of going through the legislation going through Parliament, there was engagement from stakeholders, and then ongoing engagement in relation to the implementation. The large majority of proponents were very positive about the need for additional support for processing. The competitive landscape suggests that the government stepping in and supporting this production will anchor the value in Australia. And so most proponents that we talked to were supportive of it. Some people were concerned about the overall fiscal cost and what that relates to, and then there were quite a few discussions around the technicality of the coverage and the scope and the processes, as you would expect in any complex policy design, and all of that was worked through bilaterally with Treasury and ourselves, and then there was a parliamentary process as well. So there's been quite a lot of consultation on this process. So would my team have anything to add?
We've talked a little bit about valuating earlier this evening. In terms of the benefits of using a production tax credit as opposed to other policy settings in this space, are you able to elaborate on some of the thinking behind that?
Senator Peter Chesworth, Head of Minerals and Resources Division. I think the underpinning rationale behind using a tax incentive is to provide certainty for business. the tax incentive doesn't commence until 2027, which gives, firstly, a good opportunity for us to establish the system appropriately, but also it gives business and potential investors very good lines of sight. With a tax incentive, it's an entitlement-based benefit, as opposed to alternatives such as a competitive grants-based process where essentially you're not really sure what you're going to get. So that's really the underpinning rationale for a tax incentive.
Can I pick up on something you said about certainty? Obviously there's a situation here where very publicly this is a government policy and it's been opposed and presumably would be repealed in the event of a change of government. Perish the thought. What impact would that have in terms of investments made or the investment kind of outlook or profile for businesses if the tax credit, having been announced, were now to be removed or were to be removed in future?
Senator, it's probably quite hard to speculate. Ms Robertson has already given some figures and some indication of the projected benefit of the production tax incentive to the nation, and anything beyond that is probably speculation on my part.
I think I can answer that confidently. Investments that would have occurred would not occur. It's a future Dutton government is the definition of sovereign risk for Australian manufacturing and investment in Australia. It would lead to another decade of disinvestment in our energy system. That would mean that we continue to just export commodities offshore and become less safe, less secure, less prosperous and less productive.
May I ask you, Secretary, to elaborate very briefly on the national security element of this policy and the benefits of bringing key aspects of that supply chain onshore?
So the Future Made in Australia framework, and as articulated in the legislation, has sort of two broad streams. One is the net zero transformation stream, which includes industries where Australia will have a comparative advantage as the global economy transition to net zero, and the economic resilience and security stream, which includes industries where some level of domestic capability is necessary to deliver economic resilience and security. So there are some advantages under the transformation stream, an opportunity for us to capture the economic value of moving upstream in the critical minerals processing supply chain. On the economic resilience and security stream, there are elements that are very important for national security, but also the transition to net zero that we need to have access to going forward, and including some of our major trading partners. We have seen China put export restrictions on various critical minerals over time for their own purposes. Some of those have been directed to major trading partners such as Japan and directed to individual countries such as Japan or the United States. Others have been directed just generally a ban on export of certain minerals. That sort of activity creates uncertainty and it means that we need to be working with partners to have secure supply chains. And there are some critical minerals used for very specific purposes in national security functions that we and our allies would need to have access to. So that's one of the arguments for the economic resilience. There's also the situation that when you have a predominant, if the current market is very concentrated, it's very difficult for private companies to make decisions to invest in that market because there's a significant player who could use actions to make it uneconomical for private industry to go forward. And so that's another reason to work with other countries in particular, not just Australia alone, to be able to accelerate investment into some of these projects which will benefit diversity in the supply chains. So some of it's market as access, Some of it's about providing assurances to companies that there will be a market for them. And it's important for national security and the transition to net zero, because a lot of these are used, some of these critical minerals are also used in high-end technology, critical technology kind of activities, such as our mobile phones use a large number of critical minerals, and so it's not just defence, but it is also everyday consumer items that we use.
To go back to where I started, I appreciated I asked about modelling the first time. Did the impact statement say anything about jobs or the potential for job creation, particularly in Western Australia and Queensland out of this?
My recollection, Senator, is that it didn't specify the total number of jobs by state, but the total was expected to be around about 143,000. Thank
you. Secretary, we were talking earlier about various aspects of comparative advantage in Australia. What do you see, if there are any, other comparative advantages Australia has in the critical minerals space?
So we clearly have a wide variety of minerals in our geography. We have a world-class Geoscience Australia, a world-class institution that has mapped and has ability to map and find resources, that provides pre-competitive information. That is a national asset. Other countries are trying to catch up to Australia's ability to map our geography. We have a very capable mining services companies. Some of the biggest mining companies operate in Australia or Australian-owned. They have the capability to marshal the complex engineering requirements to be able to do the work that we're talking about. And we also have a highly skilled workforce. Some of the processes required to refine critical minerals are highly complex chemical processes that require very careful management of environmental and safety standards. And we have strong regulatory regimes that mean that these processes can be managed in an appropriate way. That's a net benefit to the global community, because some of these processes impact on water. So our strong regulatory environments, our capable workforce, our access to capital, our resources, all kind of stack up to mean that we've got great capabilities in this part of our economy. Have I missed anything?
No, Secretary.
And last question also.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Particularly in some of those chemical processes, China's a long way ahead of other parts of the world. Do you have any insight into where Australia sits in the outside of China effort to develop effective and efficient chemical processes to get critical minerals to a useful stage?
We are very capable in the early stages, so the first kind of steps. Once you get to the more complex end of the process, we will need to invest in innovation and technology. The government has provided support for a large number of companies to do pilot projects and pilot studies, and there's a critical minerals hub as well on the sort of technology side. So private companies with government support, including state government support, are working hard on proving up some of the technology options in Australia. But access to the IP and the technical capability, a lot of these are sort of chemical processes that require knowledge of precise composition of the goods, of the minerals coming in. And so we are working on it. I would sort of characterise it as on the first stages we're doing okay. The latter stages we've got more work to do, and the production tax incentive will spur private companies to invest in that, working with our world-leading organisations such as CSIRO and ANSTO and engineering companies and the like to develop that IP.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ghosh. Senator McDonald.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I would like to go to staying with the North West Shelf. Regarding environmental approvals for gas projects, is it safe to assume that DQ consults with DISA prior to decisions being taken? Is that correct?
So they may. So that they may or may not, depending on the nature of the activity. We certainly talk to them about where they're up to on various processes, etc. But as to the technical aspects, they would consult us if there were subject matter expertise that we had, but they make the decisions, and in some cases we wouldn't have subject matter expertise. So it depends on the nature of the questions that they're that are the issue that they need to resolve as part of their decision-making processes.
All right. In the Environment and Communications Committee on Monday, DQ advised that DISA had not been consulted with in regard to the North West Shelf extension currently under consideration. If DQ's consulted with DISA on other approvals in the past, can you spell out for me why you weren't consulted on this one?
So I'm not sure that like I said, it depends on the nature of the questions that they're concerning. I wouldn't expect us to be consulted if it was a detailed environmental matter that we didn't have any subject matter expertise. They're not required, I don't believe, under their Act to consult with us. So I'm happy to take it on notice. We certainly work with them on areas where we've got expertise, and we ask them as whole of government processes where they're up to on various aspects, and we stand ready to provide any support that they ask us. But we're not always necessarily involved in kind of acute decisions about timing or how they engage with their minister, for example.
So I was intrigued then when DQ claimed they were relying on advice from our own internal gas colleagues for a reason to delay the approval, stating, in fact, our advice from our own internal gas colleagues is that the approval delay, is not a substantive impact to the overall supply and demand of gas in the near term. Has anyone from DISA seen the advice DQ referenced?
Happy to take it on notice. We, as Mr. Jeremiah can talk about, we have regular conversations with the gas market expertise in DQ. We have joint responsibility for advising our respective ministers on issues under the code. And we also have a process to have discussions around the ACCC reports and the ADGSM and the heads of agreement. So we have a lot of engagement with the gas side of the system, given they look after the domestic regulatory environment. So, but we can take on notice whether we've seen the specific advice in relation to what we may or may not have seen that specific bit.
I think this decision's been... I think the evidence was that this decision's been with the Commonwealth just for a matter of weeks. I mean, I would point out, I mean, we as this government has gone to enormous effort, including recruiting new staff for development approvals, presumably also part of the 36,000 staff that a future Dutton government would sack, but that has meant that approvals have moved from 53% being on time to 84% on time. Actually, these things do matter, but matter much more than words. I see that you've just released your policy prescriptions, which say that a future McDonnell-Dutton government, however it would be described, would halve approval times. Given approval times were almost twice as long, you had 84%. Up from 53% to 84%, like that is a laughable proposition. After all these hot briefs out to journalists about gas reservation, you've walked away from that.
Chair,
it illuminates some of the questions tonight, but that is it is a laughable proposition.
Senator McDonald's raising a point of order. Senator McDonald.
I thought the process was that I would ask questions, and given the lateness of the time and how much time I've lost to agencies today, that it would be helpful if we all worked in the best interest of narrowing our answers to things that were things I'd asked about.
I think...
I know that the Minister has the discretion to say whatever he wants, but we are running out of time. We've already had to release 2 agencies, and I'll just ask that we try and keep this tight. So
on the point of order, which is probably broadly relevant, and as you've said, the Minister's entitled to answer, and his remarks are broadly relevant in relation to gas issues, would just ask the Minister to also be mindful of time in concluding his remarks.
Well, let me make it do. I will try and just deal with that question that you asked very quickly. In your policy document briefed out to the Australian, you say you want to get back to $10 a gigajoule gas. But when the country needed you
Minister,
to vote for $12 a gigajoule, you voted against it.
Which has failed according to the ACCC.
You now appear to support the mandatory gas code of conduct, but you opposed it.
It's not fair, Chair.
Well, it's not fair on the country for the Liberals and Nationals to drop such a weak policy prescription,
to these
briefed out just before an estimates hearing in the breathless anticipation that somehow the questions here will support it. The idea that you can mandate what Victoria does
this is really unfair.
Is utterly silly. Anyway, continue asking your questions.
Senator McDonald.
Thank you, Chair. Secretary, was Minister King briefed prior to the decision to delay the approval?
By her Environment Minister colleague. I'd have to take that on notice.
By your department?
I don't believe so, but I'm happy to take it on notice.
What contact have Minister King and Minister Plibersek or their officers had regarding the decision to delay the North West Shelf approval?
I would have to take that on notice.
Considering that your own chief economist wrote in the December REQ that Australia's LNG export volumes could tighten due to the depletion of the North West Shelf, which is now at greater risk due to the stalling of the extension approval, does this not highlight the near-term risk to supply and demand of gas in Australia?
So the analysis on the Western Australian side is that there will be potentially shortages, but they're some way off. They're further away than the potential shortages on the East Coast. And so we will need, Western Australia will need more gas supply if it's to maintain the current outlook for demand. And so that will be needed at some stage. These are projects that go over a large number of years. A few months delay can be important or maybe not, depending on the circumstances of the particular situation.
Okay, so action one of the future gas strategy is preventable gas shortfalls. Delaying extensions to gas projects directly impacts future supply, risking further shortfalls. How is this decision consistent with the government's own strategy?
It's also important that a government has regulatory regimes that support social licence for industries. The long-running approach to in Australia has been to have regulatory environments that do support foreign investment, such that people can invest with certainty once decisions taken and approvals have done. That means that we have strong and rigorous processes to get approvals so that we can maintain the social licence and the investment certainty post-decisions. So that's a long-running part of Australia's system.
It's
so
also not true to say that it's also, I want to deal with the question. It's also not true to say that there is a delay. It's just incorrect. This came from the Western Australian Government towards the end of last year. There's been a request for more information, which the Western Australian Government has turned around very quickly, in terms of these kind of projects, and the government is now dealing with it. That is fast work. We don't run around pointing the finger at state governments trying to create an argument around the Commonwealth. I say they have moved quickly. This minister will deal with it. The government will deal with it quickly. There is no delay. That is a fiction.
The Karratha gas plant supplied 14% of Western Australia's total domestic gas needs in 2024. Installing this extension approval jeopardises the energy needs of every Western Australian. Minister, I want to ask you, does Minister King support the stalling of this approval?
I'm sorry, Senator. This is don't say this to be disrespectful. I was distracted by something. Do you mind asking again?
Actually, in the interests of time, I think we'll just move on.
I'm sure it would have been a good answer had I had an opportunity.
I'm sure it
to
would
do
have been. Page 3 of the DISA PBS states that the Resources Minister is responsible for ensuring sufficient gas availability to meet domestic demand. Minister, in relation to domestic demand, can you please advise us what the average household gas bill was at the change of government and what is it today?
I don't have those figures in front of me. I would think that in the normal course of events that would be a question that DQ would answer. We have, in a systematic way, worked through the issues. We've done more than have a sort of 3-word slogan in terms of gas, and an under-resourced department and a slow approval process. We have worked systematically through the issues. We extended the gas trigger when your government had sat on its hands and done nothing to move that ahead. We have a mandatory code of conduct. We have resourced the department properly so that approvals are being dealt with much more speedily than dealt with under the schmozzle that was the previous government's administration of these questions. Multiple resource projects under your administration in a complete legal quagmire because of a shambolic decision-making process. And what I see from the article in The Australian, which breathlessly reports what it is that you put to them, is it's just a return to the same old, which will be lots of talk, but no new gas, lots of talk, but a failure to deal with the issues that industry needs to be dealt with, particularly the manufacturing sector, which rarely features in your questions. And we have a coherent energy plan. The worst thing that could happen to the gas industry is Peter Dutton's nuclear reactor plan, which would see immediately prices rise, demand for gas in the electricity system increase, which will push up prices, and investment deferred. If you have any more questions about the government's record, I'd be delighted to answer them.
Senator McDonald, Senator Cox has questions for this program as well, so we'll now go to 10-minute blocks. I'll go to Senator Cox and I'll come back to you, Senator McDonald. Senator Cox.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I ask some questions in relation to the contaminated water spill in the Beetaloo Basin? So, Ms Quinn, is that you? Officials?
I don't believe it is, but it might, I mean, maybe us, it certainly doesn't ring any bells for me.
Ask away, can I?
And we'll see whether we can answer you.
Have a go. It's really just to find out some facts. That it's been reported that there was a 2,000 litre contaminated water spill at the Imperial Energy fracking site in the Beetaloo Basin. And the report says that there will be a further investigation by Imperial Energy, but also some government inspectors. Is that through DISA or is that through the NT government? Because
it's onshore. It's onshore, so DISA doesn't do the regulation for onshore, so it'll either be our under the Environmental Act, or it might be under the state regulation.
Lovely,
but
thank you.
I'm happy to take it on notice and direct you to the relevant regulatory agencies.
That would be great. It's just that the traditional owners have talked to us about, in particular, some of the risks that are associated with these water tanks, and that they preempted this spill and were in fact ignored. Right. And so they took this to the company and said, we know that the rain's coming, you know, there's about to be a big spill, but in fact there's also a lot of native bushland that's been affected by that. And I think it's safe to say that fracking operations across the country now need to be looking at this, and scientists and environmentalists have done a lot of commentary about it. So I'm curious to know what the department might be doing, and if it's not your department, if you could take it on notice and maybe get back to us to let us know who we should direct it to.
I think there was evidence about this in DQ estimates 2 days ago.
I believe Senator Waters may have asked this question.
Yes, that's right. And so the evidence was, in short, that the Minister has asked the Independent Expert Scientific Committee to provide specific scientific advice about what impact exploration activities might be having on water resources, and the committee's expert advice was that water was not being impacted. That was the state of evidence there, but no doubt, you will continue to deal with those issues in DQ estimates.
So, but the native bushland has, and that there were trees that were dying as a result of this spill, and so that's been reported.
I'm just telling you what the evidence was there. This department can't help you with it.
That's fine. Thank you. Thanks, Minister.
You did ask what we were doing in relation to in this department. One thing that the government has provided funding to Geoscience Australia under the Resources for the Future program in the 24-25 budget is funding for in future as they do work on geospatial awareness to look more at water and water resources and the implications for water and how it runs, including working with First Nations groups because of the importance of water in the development of a lot of the future mining. So the government has invested more money and given the direction to Geoscience to take into account water as they do further exploration and make that information public in a way that's accessible to all parties involved in the discussion. And they're putting together a specific focus on working with First Nations organisations to find out what sort of information and how to provide that information in a way that's useful going forward. So that is something that will be rolled out over time in future through Geoscience's program.
Okay. I'll put that question on notice and then thank you, Ms Quinn. Can I just go to, DICE has been working on some screening tools for CCS with CSIRO. Are there any other departments that you are talking to in relation to screening tools?
Sorry, Senator, I'm not aware of that unless colleagues are screening tools with CSIRO.
For carbon capture and storage. It's on your website.
It might be in our site.
My Google's not that great, so I can assure you that it's on your website. But is Geoscience involved in that? Are you mapping any of that? Is this something that you're doing across departments with DQ? I don't want to give you the answers at 9:20 at night, but we're being generous here.
So carbon capture and storage touches on a few different areas. Geoscience is always looking at the underlying geology and providing information on that. CSIRO is doing various components. We're looking at the regulatory environment. There is work on international arrangements as well for trading or not of how do you account for carbon capture and storage across boundaries. I'm happy to take on notice the specific request that you had. It could well be through our science side rather than our resources side if it's CSIRO project.
Okay, thank you, Ms Quinn. Under the OPGGS Act, there are licences for petroleum gas and also licences for injection, assessment and storage of greenhouse gases. Is this now a requirement that petroleum gas projects have a plan for CCS for their emissions? Is it?
You go.
I'm not aware of there being a requirement. Certainly, there are separate processes should a title holder wish to explore a carbon capture and storage acreage or permit versus petroleum, but there's no requirement they are linked. If that is
so is NOPTA doing that at the front end, I suppose is my question. It's probably a NOPTA question, but it's also a DISA question. Like, are you pushing this whole, you should have CCS in order to get an approval for a licence? Like, is that something that now? So
the licences are separate, but there is a government intention under the future gas strategy. There is a focus on what making sure that there are emission reductions within any future gas exploration or extraction, so reducing the emissions intensity of gas. So there are a set of things there. The safeguard mechanism is one mechanism. The requirement to reduce their emissions intensity of production over time, and that includes venting and flaring. So most companies looking to invest in gas around the world are looking at options to reduce emissions, including the possibility of carbon capture and storage. That they are doing that also for their requirement for their investors, who are requiring them to demonstrate how they're meeting emission reduction targets that they are setting as part of their investment sources. So there's a lot of pressure on companies to reduce their emissions intensity. From our perspective, we're looking at the regulatory environments to enable that to go forth, and then there's regulators who are required to assess it as part of their environmental approvals, such as NOPSEMA. So NOPTA does look after, there is a process for carbon capture and storage assessments.
Sorry, were you coming to the table for... Did you want to add to that? Sorry.
I think the Secretary's answered it quite well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. No, that's fine. I just thought you were jumping in. Is there a plan to look at the impacts of CCS and what that might actually have in the way of impact on the marine environment, particularly as it is about the injection of greenhouse gases into the seabed floor? And is the language that's currently being used, I picked this up from DQ on Monday, but are we referring to that now as on-site abatement? Is that the language that's being used?
So I'm not close enough to the kind of language used. I mean, there are different abatement technologies. One is CCS, the other is reduction of energy use itself, and as I mentioned, venting and flaring. The environmental impacts and obligations on companies doing CCS is a matter for the Department of Environment. As you know, there are a whole sequence of processes, such as what Chevron does in Western Australia. So,
which is not commercial scale, yes. Yes, I am aware.
It's significant in terms of emission reductions, so that's under the environment regulation, which will be part of the approval process for future projects.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Cox. Senator McDonald.
Thank you, Chair. I've got some questions for the Radioactive Waste Group. Yes, there you are, Mr Usher. Just got some numbers questions first. What was AWA's actual expenditure for 23-24 and associated ASL and cost?
Good evening, Senator. Sam Usher, the Chief Executive of the Australian Radioactive Waste Agency. I'd like to ask my colleague, Ms Lindsay, to answer that question, please.
Thank you. Jodie Lindsay, General Manager, Australian Radioactive Waste Agency. The total expenditure for the Australian Radioactive Waste Agency in 23-24 was $22.5 million, and our I don't have the actual ASL for the year, but I do have the figure of full-time equivalents at the end of June 2024, which was 64 staff.
Do you have the cost for staff?
We have a split between departmental and administered, which departmental covers more than just staffing, and that was 13.3 million, and administered was 9.2.
Can you tell me, Ms Lindsay, what is the forecast budget for the following years, 24, 25, 25, 26, 26, 27, 27, 28?
Thank you, Senator. The forecast for the periods which you're talking about is a total of 87.5 in administered funding and 185.2 in departmental funding.
Could you divide those up by each year, please?
Yes, I can. For 24-25, our administered funding is 23.68 million and departmental funding of 47.5 million. For 25-26, administered is 22.96 million and departmental is 45.25 million. For 2026-27, administered is 20.743 million and departmental 44.67 million. And 2027-28, administered is 20.1 million and departmental is 45.1 million.
45.1. Thank you.
Just noting these are forecasts as opposed things change and
I understand.
Move things around.
We can't see the future, can we?
Yeah, and we make a decision within the department about some of the departmental based on priorities and resources and some money spent in other parts to provide services, so that shifts depending on the overall strategy for the department to get the most efficient outcome.
Okay. Are you providing an indication there that it might shift upwards or downwards, or you're just making that comment broadly?
It has kind of. We have certainly shifted some resources from what might be in AUSParliament's budget to central, because we've created, for example, we've got a legal and integrity unit, a division now that centralises our legal advice to get synergies and capability building. So that's in that division as opposed to, and it then provides legal services to AUSPar. So that's an example where we've centralised services.
Ms Lindsay, could I turn to the associated ASL or full-time equivalents for each of those years and the costs, please?
I don't have the actual cost of the staff, but our as the Secretary said, the funding that was in the departmental was FTE of 100 or ASL of 140 for the 24-25 financial year, and 145 for the 2025-26, and the same going out over the forward estimates.
Thank you. Is this in line with the previous allocations, or has there been an expansion of full-time equivalents?
No, this has been in line with previous.
So there haven't been any new employees hired in AUSPar?
Yes, we have been employing staff.
I'm sorry, so my previous question was there an increase in the number of full-time equivalents? And you said no, and then I said, have there been new employees hired? And you said yes. Could you clarify that for me?
Yes, the difference is that in terms of the forecasts have not changed, but the AUSPar was below forecast and has been moving up towards their allotted staffing ratio. So that's how those two things are consistent.
So how many employees have been hired in this last 12 months?
Over the last 12 months to the end of December, we had 26 new staff start, but unfortunately we also had 13 staff depart.
Oh dear, so you've only got a net additional 13?
Correct.
Would you be able to provide me with a list of the titles and levels of those new positions, please? On notice, obviously.
Absolutely, we'll take that on notice.
What kinds of roles have been filled?
So we're very pleased with the quality of the people that we've got in. We have quite a number of new technical staff, safety and technical, that are working to support the development of our technical programme. We have also, over the last 12 months, strengthened our social licence team, and they are looking at how we develop a social licence strategy that will underpin any future siting process. And we've also recruited a number of staff in the programme management office. We will be delivering programmes over the long term, and it's important that we have the capability to manage what will be complex programs moving forward.
How many of those new employees are Australian citizens or citizens of other countries?
I think the majority of people, off the top of my head, the majority of people are Australian citizens. Certainly that we've recruited over the last 12 months, but I'm very happy to confirm that information by taking it on notice.
That would be terrific. How many contractors do you currently employ?
We have 2 labour hire contractors currently.
Are they new positions?
No, they have been with us for a period of time.
Will they be affected by the government's new industrial relations laws about employment conditions?
I don't believe so, no.
Mr Usher, do you expect any other staffing or budgetary changes in the short term?
Well,
I mean, that's a difficult question to answer. We're going through a budget process at the moment, which is not yet announced. So there are changes from time to time, so it's a bit hard to predict.
Okay, so he doesn't expect any changes, is what I'm going to write down. What is AUSParliament's turnover?
So the turnover for the 12 months to the end of December, I think was 21%. At the last time I reported estimates in June, the turnover was 26%. So I'm pleased to be able to show that that is reducing.
Do you have any updates to the Kimber site?
At the last estimates in November, I confirmed that we'd completed the physical work that had been done at the site, and we were moving through the process to dispose of the site, following the Commonwealth property disposal policy. The first stage of that policy is was to see whether there are any other Commonwealth agencies or entities that would be interested in acquiring the site. We followed that process. There was no interest from other Commonwealth entities in acquiring the land. So we're proceeding through to the next stage in the Commonwealth property disposal policy, which is moving towards an open market sale. We're undertaking the preparations for that. We're undertaking due diligence, and we anticipate that the land will be put on the open market in due course.
Is one of the options to go back to the previous owners? Would you offer it back to them?
Well, under the land was acquired under the National Radioactive Waste Management Act, and under that there is no obligation to offer first refusal to either the previous landowner or anybody else. The government, we're looking to follow the disposal policy, and we are looking to follow an open market process, which will lead to transparency in the process and also ensure the best return for the taxpayer.
I appreciate there's no requirement to do that, but given it's in a little regional town, I wondered if that might have been the right thing to do, if it's in the middle of their property or, anyway.
They're open to be part of the open market sale process.
Does AUSPar have any contracts out for tender currently?
We do have some contracts that are currently out for tender. I don't have the details of those with me, but I'm happy to confirm those contracts that are out for tender at the moment on notice.
Okay. If you would take that on notice, and also on notice, I'd like to know if you've entered into any contracts in the last 3 years, what they are, how many have been finalised, and how many are currently under negotiation.
We're happy to take those on notice, yes.
Mr Usher, can you please provide an update as to what AUSPar has been undertaking in regards to developing a dedicated, permanent, low-level radioactive waste facility?
we've been undertaking a number of activities associated with the establishment of disposal pathways for both low-level waste and also for intermediate-level waste as well. We have been updating the National Radioactive Waste Inventory, and we'll be looking to publish that, publish the next version of that later this year. That inventory underpins the analysis, the work that we're doing to support decisions on disposal pathways. There are a number of steps that we are taking at the moment that lead towards the I suppose the next significant decision point, which will be the preparation of initial business cases, which will an initial business case, which will set out, consider the range of options for establishing disposal pathways for low-level waste. This will include a range of factors. It will look at, of course, the safety as an overarching priority. We will look at cost, programme, and also the different commercial models that might be available, potential via the Commonwealth investment framework. So these are examples of the work that we're looking to do for low-level waste.
Do you have an estimated time frame for this process?
Well, I think as we're aware, this is complex work. There is a range of factors that we're bringing together in that. I think it's as the government has said, it's important that we take the time to do that right. We're not only just looking at low-level waste, we're also looking at plans for establishing disposal pathways for intermediate level waste. This will require deep geological disposal, and it's important that we take an integrated approach to ensure that we're optimising the kind of disposal pathways that will address all of the Commonwealth's civilian and legacy defence wastes.
Thank you. Chair, I'll put the rest of my questions for AWA on notice, if that's okay, so that we can move to NOPSEMA, please.
Yes, indeed. That concludes the questions we have for Outcome 1, Program 1.3 and ANSTO, and we now move to NOPSEMA. And the committee welcomes representatives from NOPSEMA. And we'll just keep broadcasting while you come to the table. And Ms McCarry, sometimes you have an opening statement, which I think, as per usual at this stage, if you do, we would table it.
Yes, Chair, we've already agreed to have it tabled, so that's no problem
Fantastic,
at all.
thank you. Senator McDonald.
Thank you very much, Chair. Hi, Ms McCarry, thank you for coming. Might have thought you'd escaped tonight, but we've just snuck you in.
Senator McDonald, sorry. Oh, and excuse me for interrupting you, but I should indicate that Senator Cox is also here for NOPSEMA.
So, I hear you.
Yep.
What was the average assessment time for EPs accepting in 23-24 in days, please?
Thank you, Senator. Sue McCarry, Chief Executive Officer of NOPSEMA. Okay. The average assessment timeframes for environment plans completed in 2024 was actually reduced by 42 days. So it's actually gone from 384 days as an average in 2023 to 342 days in 2024. So we've actually seen a slight reduction.
What was the longest period for an EP to be accepted in 23-24?
The longest one in 23-24 I've got there is one that is actually the longest. We actually have one that's under assessment still that was submitted in the end of 2022. So that's currently the longest one.
I think, Senator, we gave evidence last estimates on the longest running one at that time, which was Santos Legendre Environment Plan, and that was accepted this year. So
this is now the longest one.
That's probably the best reference.
What project is that?
Santos Legendre decommissioning.
I'm sorry. What is the new current longest?
That's Jadestone Stagfield operations.
At page 6 of the Regulator 2023 issue 4, it states NOPSEMA recently engaged Professor Amanda Carney from the University of Melbourne and San Diego State University to develop and deliver a bespoke training session to deepen our understanding of sea country. We were able to benefit from Professor Carney's leadership as a social scientist and spent the last 25 years working with Yanyuwa, Gawa and Mara families in the Gulf of Carpentaria, Australia. The discussions were incredibly thoughtful and there is much optimism around the future of two-way understandings of sea country in the regulatory space. Mr Grebe, you authored this section. Could you please outline what engagement Dr Carney had with NOPSEMA, please?
Certainly. Thank you for the question. Senator Cameron Grebe, Deputy Chief Executive Officer. We engaged Dr Carney through a contract to provide the training. We made requests for proposal to a number of organisations, and Dr Carney's was evaluated as the best value for money and most appropriate for the scope that we required.
What was the bespoke training session that was run?
It was across several different aspects. There was a component that was short introduction for senior leaders in the organisation. Then there was a background to the theory of an understanding archaeology, anthropology and First Nations culture. And then there was a series of, I think, 3 or 4 half-day sessions deepening understanding of First Nations connection to country and sea country.
When was the session run? Or the sessions run?
It would have been in 2023, Senator. I can't remember the exact dates. I have to take you on notice.
Thank you. Who attended the sessions?
NOPSEMA staff, Senator. There would have been a range of environment specialists, environment managers at the time. I attended some of the training.
Would you be able to provide lists, not with names obviously, but with titles?
Yes, Senator, we can take that on notice.
Thank you. Was Dr Carney compensated in any way for the sessions?
Yeah, we had a contract with Dr Canning. We paid her as per the contract.
Right, and that would have included travel costs, food, drink, that sort of thing as well?
I'd have to take that on notice. It would be provided in the contract. If it was there, we could provide that on notice.
Okay. Are you aware of Dr Carney's involvement in the Santos Barossa case?
Yes.
Are you aware that on the 18th of November, the Environmental Defender's Office engaged Dr Carney to A, prepare an expert report for the purposes of the proceedings, and B, to act as an expert witness in the proceedings. This may include appearing in the Federal Court of Australia to assist the court impartially on matters relevant to your area of expertise.
So I'm aware of that more recently, but at the time we engaged Dr Carney for the training, that event had not occurred, and certainly therefore we weren't aware of it.
No. Did Dr Carney make NOPSEMA aware of her engagement with the EDO before, during or after she was engaged to run a training session by NOPSEMA?
Not before or during. My understanding is she wasn't engaged at the point in time she did the training, and not after either. She completed the work when the training was completed.
Dr Carney was also provided with additional and supplementary material on the 20th, 21st, 24th and 27th of November 2023. Was NOPSEMA made aware at any of these points that Dr Carney was continuing to be engaged by the EDO?
I think, from memory, we were advised that Dr Carney was involved in the court case in the federal court, Munkara v Santos. We were made aware of that. I couldn't tell you the date that we were made aware.
No, the actual date, I'm not. If we have it on record, we could take it on notice, Senator, but again, that was after. Yeah.
Sorry, Senator, just to clarify, so yes to these things, but these all occurred after the training.
Right, so there was no concurrence of her providing expert witness to the trial and carrying out training at NOPSEMA?
Not to our knowledge, no, and certainly in terms of the court proceedings, when we were engaged in the training, it was well before that. As I said, I can't remember the dates exactly, but it was around the middle of 2023.
Okay, so I'm just trying to understand, you're not entirely sure when the training was, but you can assure me that it wasn't at the same time as the court
Yes,
case.
because I do remember we were told about Dr Kearney being potentially called as a witness in the court case, and that we were made aware of it because the party that told us was aware that she had provided training earlier in that year to NOPSEMA. So I know there was training was prior, because that's why we were alerted to it.
Right. So when you come back to me with the dates of the training, we'll be able to clearly see that there was at no point that Dr Kearney was receiving money from NOPSEMA at the same time as providing expert witness on that case.
Well, what you'll be able to see is when we engaged and when we paid Dr Kearney. I'm not aware of when she started being paid by EDO. So,
did you review the training that Dr Kearney gave after the revelations of the court case?
Did we receive the training?
Did you review the training?
The training was a one-off, so we. But it's your question about do we review the content of the training in retrospect?
Yeah.
No, at the time that we became aware she was going to be called or involved as a witness, we reviewed the basis on which we contracted and the scope of work, and the feedback from the staff was something that we discussed because it was well received and delivered in a professional way.
All right, so...
Senator, I need to share the call with Senator Cox.
Could I just finish this question and then...
Just one question, yeah.
Thank you. So given what has now been made clear about the evidence provided during the case and the revelations that have unfolded there, do you think you should go back and look at the training with that eye to it?
I don't think we see a need. As I said, when we engaged Dr Kearney, it was earlier in 2023. The training had a specific scope to improve NOPSEMA staff's understanding of First Nations connection to sea country, and that's what was delivered.
Senator Cox.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for appearing and staying so late for us this evening. Can I just go to the North West Shelf Woodside Pipeline approval environment plan, if possible? There doesn't seem to be any free, prior and informed consent requirements in this. Is there a reason for that?
Senator, as you're aware, I think we've discussed in the Senate before that the actual regulations that we work under, so first of all, the pipeline for the North West Shelf, the environmental approval that sits with NOPSEMA is the environmental approval that's actually outside the 3 nautical miles. So inside, in the coastal waters of WA Government, WA Government does that approval. So the part of that approval that sits with us outside that, the regulations that we work under does require informed consultation, where that consultation must focus on what are the impacts of that activity and actually work with First Nations people and other groups on working through on how those impacts are to be managed. But our current regulatory environment does not require FPIC.
Thank you, Ms McCarry. NOPSEMA is linked to outcome 2 of DQ's corporate plan of 2023, and in this year's portfolio budget statements, it states that there's a contribution to outcome 2 that's made via linked programs in relation to your role under the EPBC that links to OPGGS in accordance with the environmental management functions. Can you tell us how then is an environment plan assessed when there is no performance measure under outcome 2.2 of that plan, and that in failing to have that, linking you to that is somehow impossible that you could ever assess protecting First Nations cultural heritage? I mean, I don't understand if you say to me that you are doing informed consultation, how that is even possible when there are no guidelines, when there is no consent. And reading through the 2,652 pages of that EP, that there is information contained in there that I'm not even sure NOPSEMA know how to assess, given that you're not held to any account, particularly through the budget, through a measure that government have. So how are you doing it?
Senator, can I just clarify which particular environment plan you're referring to?
The Woodside Environment Plan.
For Browse?
Yes.
So the actual Browse project, the environment plan approval is not done by NOPSEMA. Because the Browse project actually sits across the jurisdictions of the Western Australian Government and ourselves, it is actually referred under, it's under the EPBC Act, but it actually sits with DQ for that approval.
So they are the ones that have that. But are you linked through this? That's what it says in the portfolio budget statements, that you are linked through the programs to this. So my question to you is, how are you achieving that? Not through your one-off training with somebody, but how are you embedding that? Because I feel like we've been here before. We've been here in Cooper, we've been here in Tipperkalipa, like we've been here many times with NOPSEMA. What have you changed?
So what we actually do in relation to Browse, or where we're linked to DQ, and I will hand over to Mr Grieve, who's obviously got a fair bit of knowledge in this space, is in some of those EPBC Act approvals that are actually undertaken by DQ, they may come to us under a service level agreement to look at parts of that environment plan to provide advice, but the decision maker actually sits with the Minister for Environment and advice is provided by DQ. But Mr Grieve may be able to further explain that.
That would be great.
Correct. I was also just going to respond, Senator, to the questions about the program and the linkage. So my understanding is the linked program is because of the strategic assessment that's in place under the EPBC Act and class approval that recognises that for offshore petroleum activities carried out in accordance with our program, which is the environment regulations, that they're taken to be approved under the EPBC Act. So that's the linkage of the program. In response to, therefore, there's the environmental management arrangements that exist under our regulations that we're having to work under. And we've covered that territory a lot before in estimates, but to clarify, the regulations require consultation with relevant persons, among other things, and consideration of environmental impacts and risks to acceptable levels. And in
we
that
know how broken that bit is, and we're trying to fix that, Mr Grieve. Like, we've been down that road many times.
I was going to say, Senator, that, that there is clearly work underway to clarify the consultation arrangements. Until then, we're going to have to work under the existing regulations, and there is quite a lot we're doing other than one-off
except
training.
Compelling proponents to actually do that. I know that I'm going to run short of time because we've only got 5 minutes left, but my understanding then is that by law, proponents of ocean-based resource projects such as oil and gas, CCS and seabed mining all must consult with also the Director of National Parks. Now, there are parks, marine parks that surround Browse. Has that been undertaken, or is this only in special circumstances when Woodside let them?
No. First of all, Senator, I'll just remind we are not undertaking that primary EPBC Act approval for Browse. That is actually undertaken by DQ, not us. Where our regulatory environment does intersect with Parks Australia, Marine Parks Australia, we actually have an MOU arrangement with them. So yes, we do actually consult them on any activity that relates to a marine park.
Did you consult in this instance in relation to that?
No, sorry. I might clarify. For environment plans, the consultations require consultation with a relevant person. Parks Australia is a relevant person. It's listed as a Commonwealth Government authority, and the title holder is required to consult with them. We do also have an MOU with Parks Australia. Many of the marine park management plans include requirements for any activities to occur in a marine park to require the approval of the Director of National Parks.
And or the impact, right, Mr. Grebe?
And all the impact. So the other aspect is then, which is the most often reason for a title holder consulting with the Director of National Parks, is that there may be impacts on values that the marine park's in place to protect.
Values, habitat, marine life, the whole bit,
yes.
The whole gamut.
Yes.
Who's the ultimate decision maker then? Is it DECURE or NOPSEMA in relation to those EPs?
Environment plans is always NOPSEMA. I think Ms Macquarie was referring to Browse, which is not at the environment plan stage. Okay. They're seeking that project's under assessment under the EPBC Act. Yep. It covers both state and Commonwealth waters, so it doesn't require an OPP in our system.
Okay, thank you. I quickly just want to go to Prelude Shell in relation to the project there, and there's been multiple safety breaches that have been recorded, and you know, I've mentioned earlier, Google's wonderful when you can get on your website and have a look at how bad that looks for Australian workers working offshore on rigs that are unsafe. And as the regulator, I would ask you this question: how bad does the safety record have to get for a company to be legally sanctioned, for them to have their licence removed, and for you to use your legislative power to do that? Do we need to see a death on one of these rigs? Because now we are seeing some of the most unsafe situations that these workers are being put in. And not just Shell, Prelude, we are hearing from across the board others. Why is there no action being taken against them? And why are we putting men and women who are on those offshore rigs' safety at risk continuously?
I'm happy to take that to start with, Senator. Certainly we do take action where we have incidents reported to us for any duty holder. So we actually get reports from a number of places. The unions may report to us, and we always follow those up. We may have health and safety representatives report to us. Wherever that information comes to us from, we always investigate and have a look at those issues. Then, depending on what the actual outcome of that investigation or inspection is, then gives us the power to use different types of regulatory tools within our legislative makeup. So it actually, for example, to go to a prohibition notice, there has to be, right at that moment, immediate threat to safety, and that's a fairly high bar to meet. But we also use general directions on a regular basis with these companies. General directions are actually a very serious tool that a regulator can use. It is one that, if it allows us to actually direct and actually have the company address the issues that have been raised within an appropriate timeline, if they do not abide by general direction, there are really serious implications to that, including
so
in certain
serious that you would revoke their licence? So serious that you would revoke their licence?
And that's your last question, Senator Cox.
Certainly in certain cases with general directions, they can actually there are prison terms that are attached to not following up. The actual revocation of a licence would actually be a high-level government decision. It would not be a NOPSEMA decision. But also anything, and we do investigate things that may, in the not-too-distant future, end up in the court environment. The ultimate decision to prosecute is Commonwealth Department of Public Prosecutions. It's not actually NOPSEMA, but it is for us to do the investigation and provide that information. And I think we have a number of investigations on foot now, and I've talked before about how we've expanded that part of the organisation.
Can you provide on notice how many of those? Sorry, just asking if she can provide that on notice.
Number of investigations on foot? Okay. That's right.
Thank you, Ms Macquarie. We've hit the hard marker. That concludes the committee's consideration of the 24-25 budget estimates. The committee stands adjourned. Thank you.